IB Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. It is Tuesday, January 16th. Going to do another solo show today for y'all, and I'm excited about the topic that we are going to discuss today. We are going to kind of transition into the 2024 season now that the players are back. I mean, you think about the players are back. Denbrock and Mike Brown are here. The strength coaches here. The coaches are on the road today. Just kind of going all over the country, seeing some big time players, getting out to top high schools, all those type of things. And so it's really kind of that time to start, the championship game has been played also. So it's really that time to start diving into, what this season is going to look like and what this team can be. And so we'll have like lots of different breakdowns and dive into different aspects of the team. We'll do more thorough position previews going into the spring. We'll do breakdowns coming out of the spring. We're going to have a lot to go on, but what I wanted to do is kind of take a first glance look at who Notre Dame is going to be in 2024 or who it could and should be. And there's going to be some changes, as we've talked about, guys right now that are listed on the scholarship chart are guys that I don't anticipate coming back. But as of now, we have not gotten word that they will or won't be back, those type of things. And so we're going to dive into a lot of that today. And so the show today is going to kind of go in several different directions. Number one, I'm going to kind of kick things off with just diving into what expectations are for the Notre Dame offense in 2024 and how the coaching moves that were made this offseason impact the expectations for 2024. And I'm going to ask the question, like, do they impact the expectations or do they impact our view? This is a fan base, whether it be, us in our role, y'all in your role, just we may all be on the same page. Or do those moves impact our certainty or confidence that Notre Dame will get to the expectations? And it can be both. I mean, it can be different for different people. Some people may say, no, my expectations are different now. What do you mean by expectation? I'm going to dive into all that as we get into the show. Then I'm going to kind of break down what was lost and what comes back, what we anticipate coming back. And then I'm going to get into the sort of the portal, the newcomer impact. And we'll break down like the portal moves, and we'll break down the high school players that I think have a chance to come back. And then I'm going to end things off with sort of looking at the anticipated strengths and the questions that remain for the Notre Dame football team. This show being a focus on the offense heading into the offseason. So, like one of the questions that I was asked already, and it's going to be part of the show today. Somebody, I believe, where was that question? Yeah, Detro Hunter. First question we had was, what are three things that you're most certain about going into this three things, and what are the three biggest uncertainties? Well, that's part of the show, and so we'll definitely get into that because that's a very good question. Like, what do you feel really good about right now, and what are the things that you're like, we're going to see how this goes over this next, several months as they get into spring, and then obviously things will change during the fall. So, and then at the end, I'll try my best to do a mailbag. We do have 10 questions starred right now. It is very hard. It's just me today. There's nobody on the background, so it's just me today, and so it's going to be difficult to manage, adding questions during the show. So best way is, put MB on there. I'll see some of them. I won't see all of them. The easiest way is obviously do super chats. And we'll dive into that, but I'll do my best to do a mailbag at the end of the show and dive into that. So I'm excited and ready to get rocking and rolling with you all today. Obviously, as I said, today's show, it's going to be about the Notre Dame offense. And when you look at the Notre Dame offense heading into 2024, we talk about expectations and what expectations mean can be different for different people. And here's what I mean by that. I'm going to say what my expectations are based on who Notre Dame should be. Who Notre Dame should be with the talent that they have on this football team, combined with just what the standard is for what Notre Dame should be. And it's not about, well, they've got this coach or that coach. It's more, for me, it's about, no, this is what it should be, and then it's up to the coaches to make sure that happens. For other people, the expectations may be, well, based on who the coaches are and the specific context of the football team, these are my expectations. And I think they're both very fair and reasonable ways to look at the team. But at the end of the day, it's about, can the offense get better? That's really the key. and what does better look like? And so that's kind of the focus of what this part of the show is going to be about, is setting the expectations. And when I talk about expectations, I don't really have a focus on, okay, they need to average this amount of yards and score this amount of points and those type of things. What I believe is those numbers can be very indicative of, is this offense good enough to be there? But as this past season showed, it's a lot more than just numbers. I mean, we've talked about it. Notre Dame had the most points in a game since 1912. They had since the end of World War II, I believe this was the second best season in regard to yards per play. They were at 6.95, just off the modern record of 7.02 that was set in 2015. And so when you look at it, you're like, there's a lot of good about this offense during the season. But then at the end of the day, you got to keep asking yourself, like, the defense was great. The offense scored all these points. You got all these All-Americans. Pro Football Focus every day is putting out a list of top 10 graded players in college football from 2023. And almost every time you see a Notre Dame guy in there. I mean, you saw Audric Estime at running back. You saw Joe Alt on the offensive line. You saw Howard Cross at D tackle. You saw Jack Kaiser. You saw Xavier Watts, and I don't know what their grade was for Benjamin Morrison, but I'm telling you, there weren't 10 better cornerbacks in college football than the two kids Notre Dame had. And actually, I think the linebacker and core had two guys on there. And so when I look at it, you're just got to ask them, how the heck did this team lose 3 games? It can be frustrating. And when it comes down to it, is because they weren't good enough times in enough games to go out there and get it done. And they didn't play great team football this season. And what that means is basically when the offense was good, the defense was good. When the offense was bad, the defense wasn't able to keep things going enough. Ohio State game, certainly. Defensively, Louisville for a half, and then things kind of got out of hand. Clemson, bad start. So, but at the end of the day, in the biggest games, the one consistent was the offense just wasn't good enough, and that's been true in a lot of years. And so that's a part of it. So, like, what does it mean to say your expectations are for the offense? Essentially, it's to play championship level football. Well, what does that mean? It means being able to maximize the talent you have on your football team. It means taking the talent that this football team has, which I think is outstanding, and I'll get into that later in the show, and saying, how can we get the best out of it? How can we get this team to play with the proper mindset needed to compete for a championship? How can we get them to play with the proper technical focus to compete for a championship? How do we get them to play with the right just energy week after week? And then that's the final piece, is how do you get them to play with the consistency needed to step up and be a championship caliber unit? Because ultimately that's the expectation, to play championship caliber football. And Notre Dame has not done that on offense hardly at all in the last 30 years. And that's been something that's held this program back. Like, it's funny, I'm breaking down the Notre Dame offense in the final stats category, and I'm going to bring it up because it was really wild as I'm going through this breakdown of the Notre Dame offense, and I've talked about most points scored since 2000 and what was it, 2012? I say earlier. Let me find this article here real quick, everybody. I want to get to this because it was really fascinating to view this. And let's see here, final statistics. Okay, here we go. So when you look at the final statistics for the 2023 offense, and I broke them all down, but the 39.2 points per game set a modern program record. That's since that's World War II. The previous mark was set back in 1968. They scored more points per game this season since any season since 1912. They scored points per game. They scored more total points than any Notre Dame team has ever scored. The 6.95 yards per play is second best mark in modern history. Their 5,619 yards is the sixth most in modern history. You look at the 5.28 yards per rush attempt is the seventh best mark in modern history. It's the third best mark since 2010. Their 9.1 yards per pass attempt is the third best single season mark in modern program history. The 64.7% completion rate is the fourth best mark in program history. 31 passing touchdowns, fourth best single season mark in program history. They averaged 14.1 yards per catch, which is the second best since 2010, only 0.1 behind the 20, or actually it's the let's see here, the 13 offense, which is 14.7. And so you go through and 141 first downs was the 10th best mark in modern history. So like we're watching this offense play, and you're like, this is statistically one of the 5 best offenses we've seen in our lifetimes. And I don't care if your lifetime is watching Eras teams, and you could even go back to Rockney's teams, just as statistically, this is one of the best offenses we've ever seen. But again, this team went 9-3. And when I'm breaking down the defense, it's like the defense was way better than the offense, but it didn't have those kind of rankings like the offense did. Why? Because Notre Dame has been really good on defense a lot more than it's been really good on offense in the last 30 years. And that's really what it comes down to. I mean, when you talk about those great Air Parsegian teams, I mean, yeah, they had some really good offenses. There's no doubt about it. But when you really look at where Notre Dame was back then, I mean, they were just an elite football team on defense. And that's really something that you look at and say there just were a lot of years where the defense was just truly, truly special. And then the offense was pretty good, but it was really about the defense being really, really special. And at times the defense would, bolster the offense. I mean, Coach Parsegian's first title team in 1966, they gave up 3.8 points per game. Think about that, 3.8 points per game. And, you look at other seasons, the 1970, what was it? The 1973 was his last title team, correct? That team gave up 6 points per game. You look at the Notre Dame 1988 football team, and you look at how good they were on defense that season. And then the 93 team, had a ton of talent on defense. So it's just one of those things where 2012 was bolstered by the defense. 2018 had a great defense. 2020's defense was pretty good. So when you look at Notre Dame over the years, 2002 is another example. There haven't been a lot of years where the team was kind of carried by offense and achieved great heights. There were years where Notre Dame scored a lot of points, but they weren't a great football team because their defense, wasn't where it needed to be. But those aren't often. It was the defense that really, really bolstered this football program. And so you look at that side of the ball and you say, that's the side of the ball that you anticipate should be good. It's the offense that needs to step up. And that's certainly true for Notre Dame moving forward. Yeah, statistically, it was great, but it's one thing to put up big time statistics. It's another thing to play like a championship football team. And so what a championship football team looks like, obviously statistics are going to matter. Statistics are going to be a big part of kind of what they do. And when you talk about just what this program has been and what it needs to get to, there's no debating that the offense is the side of the ball that's just not good enough. And so is the expectations for 2024 to surpass all these records and stats and things that the 2023 team did? It's possible. It's certainly possible. But to me, that's not really what I'm looking for. I think that you could see this team play championship football in 2024 and not quite get to some of those marks. And that's fine. I mean, the schedule's different. The team is different. The focus is different. There's a whole lot of things that could be different. And so when I think of what Notre Dame is as a championship football team, is less 56-point games against Tennessee State and Stanford combined with 14 points against Ohio State, 20 points against Louisville, 23 against Clemson. It's more about, I'll sacrifice the 56 against Stanford, the 58 against Pitt, the 56 against Tennessee State. Give me a touchdown less in each of those games if you can give me a touchdown more in some of those other big games, or in other cases just a field goal more when you look at some of the games that Notre Dame has lost in recent seasons. And so to me, I'm in a situation now where when I talk about expectations, the biggest expectation for me is just this team has to find a level of consistency. And in order for them to be that kind of championship team, we have to see them play at a high level game after game after game. And that's what we have not seen in the past. And if you don't like that I'm talking about the past, I mean, that's fine. You don't have to watch. But the point is you have to look at the past to understand what the expectations are for this football team moving forward. And so the rest of the show is going to be about what the 2024 offensive season is, but I'm laying the foundation of what the expectations are. And that's what I'm here um, to talk about, because the fact of the matter is Notre Dame has not won a championship since 1988. They haven't been a really a true title team since 1993. I know the 2012 team, got to the BCS game, but that team was not on the same level as Bama. Like the 93 team was arguably the best team in college football that year. The 2018 team was really good. They were a top 4 team that year, but there was a clear difference between them and who was the number 1 team that year. And a lot of it has come down to the lack of offense. And so if this program is ever going to get to where it needs to get to, they have to play great defense. There's no question about that they have to play great defense. But they also need to be in a situation where they can play great offense. That's where today's game is. And you can have the anomaly seasons, and I think Michigan had an anomaly season. But at the end of the day, to consistently compete, you have to be able to score, and you have to be able to score in the big games, whether it's in the playoff, whether it's playing Ohio State, whether it's playing Clemson, whether it's playing Texas A&M. Those are the things that Notre Dame is going to have to get to. And so expectations for me is I want a football team that's physical, and this team's has not always been physical. I want a team this season that's mentally tough, and this team has not always been mentally tough. I want a team that's fundamentally sound everywhere and not just some places. You watch the running backs play this year, very fundamentally sound. You watch the tight ends play this year, very fundamentally sound. You watch the quarterback play this year, it's kind of hard to gauge that because you're trying to break a kid down from established habits over 5 years into something new. Receiving core, not fundamentally sound. Offensive line, depends on the week we're talking about. Some weeks it was, some weeks it wasn't. And so this football team needs to be a more technically sound football team. They also have to maintain and enhance the ability to be an explosive offense. That's something that you're going to need to see this season. And they need to be a better situational football team. And when you break down what last year's team was, and you break down, where Notre Dame needs to get to on offense moving forward, situational football is going to have to be more consistently better. And that's something that's been kind of an issue for years. There have been years at Notre Dame where they're great on third down, and then the next year they're really bad. There's some years they're really good in the red zone, and then the next year they're not very good. There's too many statistical categories where they're just and forget the statistical look at it. It's just watching them play in big games where they just take big steps back. This past season, Notre Dame was okay on third down. They were 44.8. They were 58.8 on fourth down. That ranked them 24th and 45th on third down. That's good, but it needs to be better. They need to be a better situational football team. So how do you get to that point? A lot of it is what we talked about. It's about being technically sound, but it's also about having a game plan that allows you to go out there and effectively execute in those key situations. And I think one of the things we did not see this past season was a team that really went out there and had a plan in those situations early in the season. And that's something that obviously Notre Dame is going to have to get better at if they're going to have a championship offense in 2024. So situational football is going to be a very big part of where this team needs to be and what the expectations need to be. Red zone offense, they were 6th in red zone touchdown rate, which is pretty good. 16th, which is pretty good, but they were 47th in overall red zone touchdown rate. So there were too many missed opportunities where they didn't score at all. So there's just a lot of areas to me where this offense in 2024 is going to have to maintain where it was good this past season, but then really build in some really crucial areas. And the final piece is needs to be a football team, and this needs to be an offensive football team that goes into the season and you say, this is a team that has the physical toughness, mental toughness, technical soundness, and just compete level to say, and ability to focus to say, whether it's on the road against Texas A&M or home against Miami of Ohio, you're getting our best today. And that can be hard to do week after week after week. I get it. And there's going to be weeks where you're just not on top of your game. But if you're physically tough, mentally tough, and technically proficient, you can overcome those days. So when you have a game like Louisville, where your just energy level is not there, if you're physically tough, mentally tough, and technically proficient, you can overcome that and still be successful. For example, first drive of the game, Notre Dame throws an interception. The lack of technical proficiency by the quarterback and the wide receiver results in an interception. Wasn't a lack of energy, wasn't a lack of focus. It wasn't that they didn't want to be there like we talked about in pregame. It was a lack of technical proficiency. They're down 17-10 in that game. Sam Hartman drops back. Mitchell Evans gets wide open. Great play call, big play. Notre Dame gets deep into Louisville territory, we think, but the play gets called back by penalty. Hands to the face by the offensive tackle. That's 100%. That's 100% about two things, right? Two ingredients make up for that. Number one, a lack of mental toughness. Number two, a lack of technical proficiency. You committed a mistake that just is in a way of something that's never taught, right? And so you could trace that back to a lot of the issues that we saw this year from this football team was a lack of mental toughness and a lack of technical proficiency. That's where it comes down to. And so to me, that's where this team needs to get to. You want to reach expectations, physical toughness, mental toughness, technical proficiency, focus, and you need leadership. This is the biggest thing for me, this football team. When you look at 2024, they need better leadership from a player level. Coaching can only take you so far. Now, we're going to find out if this offensive coaching staff has what it takes to establish the foundation. That's one of the questions that I'll discuss later in the show. But when you look at the very foundational level, I have always felt leadership is great at the coaching level, but why were there seasons when Nick Saban's teams underachieved? Perfect example, last year's 2022 team. That team, to me, underachieved. They shouldn't. There's no way that should have been a two-loss team. You had 2 top 5 NFL draft picks on that team. You had talented offensive linemen, talented defensive linemen, great cornerback tandem, really good safety tandem, good linebacker play, talented running backs. Like I said, 2 top 5 picks, one of them being a quarterback. And that team goes out and loses 2 games to Tennessee and LSU. Why? That team didn't have the leadership at the player level. And how do I know that? Because that's what the players had talked about, and something that Nick Saban sort of alluded to at different times during the season. And so to me, that's an area where we're going to find out over these next several months if Notre Dame is that team that can go out there and play to that level. That's what, to me, it comes down to. Coaching has to take you here, right? And I don't know that the coaching was always where it needed to be last year. I don't think it was. But if the staff is what we hope it is, the coach, look, you got to get to here, right? The coaching can only take you here. You're going to need that player leadership to take you the rest of the way. And we're going to find out if this team has that. And of all the things that I'm talking about, the 2 things that are most impacted by what starts happening right now, players are in workouts today. They're going. I think they're in class today, or they start class maybe later in the week. But they're getting into workouts. Coaches on the road, players are getting with Lauren Landau starting today, and they're starting their offseason program. The mental toughness, I should say 3 things: physical toughness, mental toughness, and player leadership are all established at the very foundational level in the strength program. That's something that Matt Balis was really good at, and Notre Dame's going to need Lauren Landau to be good at. And if this team is going to have that foundation of physical, mental toughness and player leadership, player-led leadership in September and October and November and hopefully in December and January into the postseason, it starts now. And that's something that you start getting kind of fired up about and really enjoying kind of what's going on about what this team can be. And so that to me is really the expectation of what the core, the DNA of this team needs to be. And then you get into the expectations of overall, it just comes down to whatever the point numbers are, whatever the yard numbers are, the yards per play, the rush versus pass splits, where they rank in first down, third down, red zone, whatever the case may be. The expectation is this football team on offense needs to be able to go out week after week after week, and especially in the biggest moments and say, I don't care who we're playing this week, we're going to play our game. We're going to go on the attack. We're going to be the aggressive football team. We're not going to let, we're just going to abandon this part of our game because this team's playing man coverage and we didn't anticipate man coverage. No, can't do that. We're going on the attack. We're the aggressor. We set the tone, and we're going to go out there and play with physicality, play with mental toughness, play with technical proficiency, and be aggressive week after week after week and execute at a level that allows us to win every week, whether it's week 2 against Northern Illinois or game 16 against whoever you're playing in the national title game. That's the expectation for the offense. The interesting thing, and this is something I'm curious to hear from you all in the chat, if we can actually get that back on track, is to dive into a discussion about, and this is something that's more of a discussion for the board and off the air, but it really gets into a situation where, does your expectations change because of the arrival of Mike Denbrock and Mike Brown? Or is your confidence in them achieving the expectations changed with the arrival of Mike Denbrock and Mike Brown? For me, the expectation doesn't change. If they would have hired, some high school JV coach to run their offense next year, my expectations don't change. My confidence, and the reason I say that is there's this really funny tweet. There's this guy, I can't remember what his name is. He's like a high school football coach at Auburn High School in Alabama. And he does these really funny videos where he has some editor on his phone and it makes his eyes real big and his mouth real big and talks funny. And he's always doing these things kind of making fun of coaches. And it's funny for a former coach because we all know that guy. And his most recent one was about the Alabama job and, coaches that didn't get the job. And he's making fun of this. He's like, man, dog, I thought they lead. He says, we have the number one scoring offense and, the number one, number one scoring offense at the JV level in the county for the last 3 years. He thought he'd get a look at, as the head coach at Alabama. It just was really funny. But, even if they would have hired that guy to be the offensive coordinator, my expectations don't change. My confidence in their ability to get to that expectation, that's what changes for me. And what I mean is, to me, the standard is the standard. That doesn't really matter. The standard is the standard. And it's about whether or not Notre Dame can meet that standard, whether Notre Dame can live up to that standard. And that's really, to me, what I look at and say, that to me is where I have a lot of confidence in this Notre Dame football team and their ability to go out there and play at a high level. Somebody just asked who that is. The guy's name is Scott Goolsby, is the guy's name. And so he's a defensive coordinator at Auburn High School in Alabama. It's really fun. He's got some really funny stuff. And again, if you are a football coach, then you're going to really appreciate that, because the one I tweeted out the other said, this is funny because every football coach I know that has any kind of reasonableness, or even if you don't, you may be that guy, but you don't think you are, but someone else who is. You're every year at the coaches convention, you hear that conversation being had. Some high school football coach, some D3 football coach, guys at my level that are shocked that they didn't get hired, at the big time Power 5 school for a position coach job. And it's bro, that's not happening. You know what I mean? You want to get to that level, you better go be like a GA or, something like that. It's always really funny. And I always enjoy those conversations, but that's the thing for me is the expectations are there. This team needs to go out there and be able to run the football on anybody they play. And if you're going to overplay the run game, then you need to be able to burn you at the pass game. And if you're going to overplay the pass game, then they need to be able to run the ball down your throat. Just having that balance, playing great situational football, being able to make big plays. Those are all things, have some versatility from a scheme standpoint, having versatility from a personnel standpoint, using all your weapons. All those things play a role. But those are all byproducts of the things that I talked about at the beginning of the show, which is it comes down to physical toughness, mental toughness, technical proficiency, and great leadership at the coaching and the player level. And if they can get to that point, then I believe with the talent they have in the coaching staff coming back, what my expectations are with the arrival of Mike Denbrock and Mike Brown, the already presence there of Dylan McCullough, my hope and expectations for what I think Gino Guidugli and Joe Rudolph will be in year two, all of those things together have me very excited about what this football team can be next year on offense in regard to can the coaches get the most out of it. But I have zero doubt that Notre Dame has the talent to get to that point, and that's what we'll kind of dive into the rest of the show. Before I move on to that, folks, do me a favor, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review, and if you have not done so, please sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. And before we begin, I just saw this come up, and John Long, he said, my father just had a stroke, and brain tumors and lung cancer were discovered. Please pray for my father. Thanks, IB Nation. John, you got it, man. Definitely that, but I would also ask all of you that believe in the power of prayer like I do to also pray for John and his family as well, because I can't imagine what you're going through, man, and we'll definitely be praying for you. John's been around in this chat for a long time. He's one of the guys that's been here since I believe very, very early on and from when we started. So definitely keep you in our prayers, man, and let us know how things are going, and we'll certainly be praying for you and wishing you the best, man. So you definitely get that from IB. There's no doubt about it. And all the people in here, as you know, are going to be praying for you. So I appreciate you, man. Let's get into the second part of today's show. And this is a look at what Notre Dame lost and what Notre Dame has coming back. Because again, the show is about looking forward to the 2024 season and the 2024 team. But in order to understand what the team looks like, you have to understand what was lost, what returns, and what's arrived. And so part two will be about what was lost and what comes back. So it's focusing on what the just the makeup of what this team is going to be. And so when you look at the starters that were lost, I think if you're going to have any reservations about this football team this season, I think it kind of begins with, look, here's the reality of where Notre Dame is. You lost your starting quarterback. You lost an outstanding running back in Audric Estime. You lost 3 receivers that all had at least 6 starts. And you also lost a tight end who started more games than anybody else started at tight end this year. And you also are in a situation where you lost 3 starting offensive linemen that combined for, I'm trying to do the math in my head, 82 starts. So including a guy who was a unanimous All-American this past season and a guy that was a consensus, or no, he wasn't a consensus All-American in 2022, but he made, I think, 2 or 3 first-team All-American teams in 2022. So that part of it is I mean, that's a lot of lost production, and there's going to be a lot to replace. And when you look at the receivers, for example, they're going to have to replace 99 catches for 1,478 yards and 10 touchdowns from the pass game last year. When you look at the receivers, the running back, and the tight end that was departed. So that's what Notre Dame lost. So technically, and what I did is, for the purpose of this conversation, is I defined lost as anyone that started 4 or more games and returning 4 or more games. And so when you look at this, you get kind of nervous, like, man, 9 starters. You don't have 2 starters come back, but basically, to me, I count, if you start a third of the season, you're kind of a starter. And Notre Dame had some weird situations last year because they had a lot of guys. They had way more than 11 guys that started at least 4 games last year, and several others that started 2 and 3 games. So it's kind of an interesting dynamic when you look at what Notre Dame lost last year, because yes, they lost a lot of production. They lose a lot of starters. They lose a lot of guys that played a lot of snaps last season. But then you kind of dive into, because like I said, they lost 9 starters. But the way that Notre Dame played this year, it's not like a typical lost 9 starters type of season. And actually, I'm going to try to make this a little bigger because this sheet is pretty long. But when you look at like returning starters, for example, they've got 5 returning starters. Well, how can you lose 9 and have 5 coming back? Because again, you have to start at least 4 games. And Jaden Thomas made 5 starts last year. Jaden Greathouse made 5 starts last year. Mitchell Evans made 7. And then, of course, you have Pat Coogan and Rocco Spindler, because at several positions, there was not like a full-time starter. So if you look, I only have 5 offensive linemen listed in the returning starters or departed starters, because Billy Strouth and Ashton Craig didn't make enough starts for that. But those guys did start games. But to me, a quarter of the season is a regular season isn't, as you know, to me, it's I got to get to a third. So when I look at that, that's 5 returning starters. But then look at all the production that comes back next season. I think that's the thing that gets me excited and a lot of people excited, because I look at some of those guys and I look at Jaden Thomas, for example, and I look at what his production was: 21 catches for 310 yards and 2 touchdowns. And I'm like, that's Jaden Thomas is better than that. He's a better player than that. He had some issues this past season with staying healthy. He just couldn't. He got hurt against Ohio State and could never get healthy. If you look at where Jaden was the year before, he had 25 catches for 361 yards and 3 touchdowns. So he had less production this past season when he was expected to be the team's kind of number 1 receiver than he did the year before. And it's because of injuries. Well, he's going to be healthy now. The things he dealt with, he didn't have like a torn ACL. He didn't have a bad ankle injury, a shoulder injury that's going to be a problem, a back, a neck. It was soft tissue injuries. And why that's bad, because those can linger for during a season for a skill player. The good thing is once they're rested and healed, they tend not to be things that flare up all the time, as long as you're someone who takes care of your body, and Jaden does, and Jaden Greathouse does. Now, it is a concern for Jaden Thomas in that he has had a lot of injuries over his career, high school and college. So that's obviously something to consider. But if he can be healthy, there's a lot of production there. Jaden Greathouse is led the team in touchdown catches last year as a true freshman, despite going like 5 games without catching a single pass, because he was injured also. And he was moved positions, and they just did a bad job of really getting him into the game at that new position. And then you look down at the running back position and you talk about what returns for Notre Dame next year, and you talk about what was lost. Notre Dame is a very unique team in that they can lose a running back that rushed for 1,341 yards, averaged 6.4 yards per carry, and had 18 touchdowns. And you say to yourself, they're going to be all right. And not just all right because they have guys that were formerly highly ranked players, or guys that that the recruiting rankings that get you excited, but they've never done it. I mean, just from a production standpoint, how many teams in college football can lose a 1,300-yard, 18 touchdown guy and say, but our running back room returns over 1,000 yards of offense and 10 touchdowns? And that's the reality for Notre Dame. When you look at their offense between Jeremiah Love, Jadarian Price, and Jabron Payne, they combined for 825 rushing yards last season, 200 receiving yards last season, and 10 total touchdowns last season. That's really impressive. And, you see it there: 6 rushing touchdowns, 4 receiving touchdowns from that group. So you say to yourself, like, yeah, it stinks to lose Audric Estime, and you're not happy that you lose Audric Estime, but you're in a situation where you look at that running back room and you look at the 3 guys coming back there, and we're not even getting into the new arrivals. This is just what's coming back. I did not include Devin Ford because he had less than 100 yards of offense, and I'd be a little surprised if he comes back. Wouldn't be upset about it, but of those 3 guys that I'm confident right now are coming back, you look, yeah, they only had 1 start last year, and that was Jeremiah Love in the bowl game. But folks, that's over 1,000 yards of offense, and I didn't even include the 300+ yards that Notre Dame got out of Jadarian Price in the return game. Actually, more than that, because you had over 400 yards in the return game and another touchdown in the return game, because Jadarian had 344 kick return yards last year on only 10 returns. Jeremiah Love had 42 yards on 2 returns, and Jabron Payne had 41 yards on 2 returns. So you're talking about, what's that, 427, right? 427 more yards last season. Point being, these kids played a lot of football this year. There were expectations on these kids, and they have the experience to where, at a position where experience just isn't as big of a deal in all areas outside of pass blocking, where experience is it's nice to have, but it's not a situation where it's a must. And so you're returning over 1,000 yards of offense, over 1,400 yards of all-purpose production when you include the return game, and over 10 touchdowns at the running back room. There aren't a lot of teams that can say they have that coming back despite losing a starter who was top 10 in college football in that category. But that's where Notre Dame is at. They lost 3 guys, as I pointed out earlier, that were considered starters to a degree at the receiver position. It's a little misleading because Rico Flores started 6 games and Tobias Merriweather started 6 games, but they played the same position. So basically, each of them had started half the season at that position. But you return, like I said, Thomas and Greathouse, who had 5 starts apiece. Yeah, Jordan Faison started 2 games last year and played a bunch in the second half of the year. Deion Colsey has started games in the past. He was hurt last year, but he's got a lot of snaps under his belt as well. So even at the receiver position, if you just look at the returners, just focus on the returners, forget the newcomers. We'll get to them in a little bit. You're talking about you return 4 guys next season to your lineup that have started multiple games in their careers and have a lot of production. And so when you look at what returns next season, yes, they lost over 1,000 yards last season. But if you look at the overall production, and let me just kind of do the math here real quickly, but you have, was that 575 yards between Greathouse and Thomas. You also bring back 322 yards from Jordan Faison, 45 yards from Deion Colsey, plus you bring back 70 yards in the pass game at tight end, and all of a sudden, you're getting up to what, 1,000 yards, right? Close to 1,000 yards. So let me just type those in again. I hit a minus on one of those, so sorry about that. So just from the receiver tight end room, you're looking at a situation where Notre Dame is bringing back over 1,000 yards in receiving yards. Plus, you have a little under 200 coming back from the running back room as well. So right there, even though they lost a lot, 99 catches, over 1,400 yards, 10 touchdowns, you're also bringing back a depth chart that has, and you guys can count up the numbers there, 11 touchdowns at the receiver room, 2 more coming back at tight end. And I'm not even counting. Here's the thing. In all that production, I didn't even include Mitchell Evans in any of that because we don't know when he's going to be back, but I anticipate he'll be back, pretty early in the season. But then you also have one of the best tight ends in college football coming back next year if Mitchell Evans is back to 100%. So even though they lost some guys, and this is what makes this 2024 team so unique, is that they lost a lot. They lost 9 players from the starting line, guys who started at least 6 games last season. They lost 9. But they played so many guys, sometimes for good reasons, sometimes not for good reasons, that you also have a lot coming back. And that's even before you get into the portal. And Notre Dame got a portal quarterback to come in next year, and we'll get into him here in a little bit. But Steve Angeli threw for 500 yards last year, 7 touchdowns, goes out in a bowl game, plays good football, leads the team to 40 points and a 40-8 bowl game win. And that's the guy you don't anticipate in your starter. And I would argue he's your least physically gifted quarterback on the roster, which speaks volumes about what Notre Dame has coming back next year. The big question for me, when you look at what returns, is the offensive line and its experience. And this is an interesting one because you have the 2 offensive linemen that come back that are starters, but when will Rocco be healthy? That's an unknown right now because he got hurt in November and he's a 300-pounder and those guys healed, can take a little longer to get right. Then you look at 4 guys coming back. And now I don't anticipate Andrew Christopher coming back, but as of right now, it hasn't been announced that he's not coming back. So, but you have returning to the lineup next year, was it 31 starts from last season to the offense from the offensive line? And actually, let me do the math here real quick. So you got 23 coming back in the starting lineup, plus you have, let's see, 6, 7, 9 more coming back. So yeah, 32 starts coming back from your offensive line, including you return the entire starting lineup from your last game of the season, which was the bowl game against Oregon State. So I am a little concerned about the experience of the offensive line, but it's not like you're throwing guys out there that haven't played a ton of football. The only guy that hasn't played a ton of football is Charles Jagasol, who only really played that one game. He had 5 snaps in the regular season. That's it. And so when you look at what's coming back, your least experienced guy is your most physically gifted player. Tosh Baker's only had 2 starts last year. He actually started the game against Ohio State. So even that 2 starts is a little misleading because he didn't exactly play a lot of snaps in that game, but he still started, and I think he had number 85 on because they went with like a heavy tight end package in that game. And again, he started the game, but for proper context, you have to understand that he didn't play a ton of football in that game. He only played 7 snaps in that game. So in one of his 2 starts, he only played 7 snaps. But he's been on special teams last couple of years, but he ended up playing over 100 snaps last year. Started 2 games in 2021 at left tackle. So you're not throwing a bunch of neophytes out there. And then the 2 kids that have the least amount of starts other than Jagasol in their career are Ashton Craig and Billy Shrouth, who started the last 3 games of the year last year. They played pretty good football. So even there's talent coming back, and they're not exactly starting over from scratch for a team. Because again, how many teams, and I'll ask this question again, and this is partly why I'm really excited about this football team. How many teams can go into a season where they lose their starting quarterback, 1,300-yard runner, 3 receivers that started at least 6 games, including a guy that led the team in receiving yards? You lost your tight end is injured, and you don't know when he'll be back. And you lost 3 starting offensive linemen that combined for over 80 starts, had started every game through the first 10 games of this season, had started every game together the previous 2 seasons, so those 10 games plus last year, had started 23 straight games together, and you lose a unanimous All-American offensive lineman, and you look at what's coming back, and you're saying, unless a true freshman starts next year, unless Gerby Lambert starts, or unless like a Ty Chan or a Sullivan Absher or a Sam Pendleton or somebody like that, Emil Wagner beats out someone, you could go into next season with a starting lineup that has 5 guys that have started football games before, and important football games, because the only start that Charles Jagasol made was in a bowl game against the top 20 football team. So even though there's a lot lost, you get encouraged by the talent and the fact that there's a lot of snaps coming back next season as well. And that is one of the saving graces of what you look at from this football team is there is a lot. One of the issues I'm talking about 23, is there were a lot of issues this year with injuries and guys not performing and all that kind of stuff. But what that did is it created opportunities for other players to get a lot of snaps. And what's been one of the biggest issues we've had at Notre Dame in the past, especially during the Brian Kelly era, it's when you lost a lot from your lineup, you tended to be concerned about that next season because the guys that were stepping into the lineup didn't play a whole lot of football. That's not the case this year. You have a lot of guys coming back from your roster that played a lot of football last year. And so when I think about what this team has coming back, and and your offensive line, it's a big thing for me too. This is going to be the first time since 2021 that Notre Dame is going to go into a season with an offensive line coach that's not in his first year, right? Because they've had 3 different offensive line coaches the last 3 years. Quinn in 21, Heastan in 22, and then of course Rudolph in 23. And that lack of cohesiveness, I do think can be a problem. But now, whenever you think of the job Joe Rudolph did in year 1, the expectation should be that he'll do better in year 2 because he's going to know these players so much more, and they're going to know him more. So to me, when you just look at what's returning to this Notre Dame football team in 2024, boy, it's hard to not be excited about it because of how much talent is in that room, how much experience was gained by that room. Again, over 1,000 yards of total offense at running back, over 1,000 yards of offense is coming back at receiver if you include career numbers. Well over 1,000 yards is coming back if you include career numbers, because Jaden Thomas has had over 600 the last 2 years. Deion Colsey had almost 200 yards the year before. So there's a lot coming back. And so uh, that to me is a big reason why, for me, my expectations are sky high for this football team next year, because you do have so much talent coming back, and that's going to also create a lot of competition. You're going to be deep at receiving. Like, I just pointed out they've got over 1,000 receiving yards coming back next year just at receiver for career numbers, but they're going to be welcoming other players that have even more production, and freshman players who have tons of talent. And so those are all things that you look at, and boy, this is you start getting kind of excited about what this team could be. And then you start talking about the coaching staff. Is there a coaching staff in place? And I'll ask you all in the chat. You guys tell me right now, do you have a greater sense of confidence that this coaching staff now, with Mike Denbrock coming in to be the OC, with Gino Guidugli going into year 2, with Joe Rudolph going into year 2, with Dylan McCullough being on staff, and the arrival of Mike Brown, do you all have more or less confidence? And I'm genuinely asking this question. I would love to hear your responses if y'all are paying attention. But do you have more confidence that there's a coaching staff in place that has a better chance of getting the most out of that talent than what we saw last year, and the ability to get the most out of the talent that they had? Do you all have greater confidence in the overall depth of this football team coming into this season than you did a year ago? To me, I do, because not only do you have like last year, we look at running back. Yes, you had Aldrick Estime coming back, but after that, we didn't know what Jeremiah Love could do at the college level. We didn't know what Jadarian Price could do at the college level. We didn't know what Jabron Payne could do at the college level. We do now. We had no clue who Jordan Faison was. I mean, yeah, he did some nice things in the spring, and we always liked his talent. We had him on our show on signing day last year. We knew what, we loved Jaden Greathouse, had him as a top 100 recruit, but you didn't really know what he was going to be in year 1. And so there were so many question marks about the team last year. And last year we were in a situation where I felt there was a lot of talent last year, but it was a lot of unproven talent. The difference this year, just from a talent standpoint, is there's a lot more proven talent coming back next year. Just not even incoming guys, but just on the roster. There's a lot more receivers that have played a lot of football this year than there was last year. And that's kind of something that gets me fired up. And I've been a defender of Jared Parker in the past, and maybe what he might have been able to do in year 2. But the one thing I'll say, as much as I appreciated some of the things that Jared Parker did, he's not Mike Denbrock. Mike Denbrock's just a more established coach, a more effective coach. I mean, here's some numbers that I looked up in for the article, which kind of get you fired up. So obviously we know what Notre Dame did this past season, but here's some things that get me fired up. So when you look at what Mike Denbrock did in his last 4 years as an offensive coordinator, they averaged, this is 2 years at Cincinnati, 2 years at LSU. They averaged 38.6 points per game, 464.4 yards per game, and in a 4-year stretch, averaged 7.0 yards per play. Here's another part you guys are going to like. The last 2 years at LSU, they averaged 33.8 points per game against ranked opponents over the last 2 seasons. And the thing that you look at, too, is what did they do before and what did they do after? And when you look at what Cincinnati was before Mike Denbrock got there, they were not a very good offensive football team, and he eventually built them up into becoming one. And you just kind of saw like steady growth. His first year, they were at 20.9 points per game. He inherited a team that averaged 19 points a game. They only averaged 20.9 in his first year. The next 2 years, they were over 30. And then in 20 and 21, they took off and were over 37 points a game. And then you look at what happened the year after he left. They dropped down to 29.2. And this year, they dropped down to 24.1. And you do the same thing at LSU. You look at what LSU did in the 2 years prior to his arrival. So he arrived there in 2020 and 22, excuse me, in 2020. LSU only averaged 32 points per game. That dropped down to 26.5 in 2021. It jumps back up to 34.5 in Denbrock's first year. And then this past year, they averaged over 46 per game when he was the offensive coordinator. And so that's a lot of production that you look at, but it's also improved production. It's not just about, okay, you were part of something good. Was that already there? Did you just kind of keep it going? Well, in Denbrock's case, the answer is no. And I look at it here, final 2 seasons under Denbrock, or excuse me, The final 2 seasons under Denbrock, they at Cincinnati, they were 37.1 points per game, 429.3 yards per game, 6.7 yards per play. In the 2 seasons since he left, they dropped down to 26.8, 398.6 yards, and 5.8 yards per play. Those are big, big drops. LSU in the 2 years prior to him arriving averaged 28.9 points per game, 396.9 yards per game, and 5.5 yards per play. In 2 seasons with Denbrock, they averaged 40 points a game, 496.7 yards per game, and 7.3 yards per play. So the reality is we know what he can do. And we saw with our own eyes when you look at what Notre Dame did offensively in 2014 and 2015 with Mike Denbrock leading the charge and what that offense even was in 2014 before all the injuries set in and the things that they did that season. And then obviously the 2015 team, this year's team was number 2 all time in at least modern record in yards per play. Well, what offense owns the record? It's Mike Denbrock's 2015 offense. And those things were to me, something that gets you kind of fired up about what this football team can be next year on offense, because again, you get into the situation where the production is there. And so the experience is there, the proven production is there, all those things are there. And that's what kind of gets you fired up. So to answer my question, and what I think a lot of you agree with, is there is a greater confidence that the staff that you see now is better positioned to get the most out of this roster for me for 2 reasons. Number one, I think the staff is in a better place. Even the guys that are coming back are now going into year 2 with certain units. So like, again, running back is now going into year 3 with that group. Offensive line, quarterback are going into year 2 with that coach. And you've got a new coach coming in at receiver, which I think is going to be a benefit, and a new coach coming in as the offensive coordinator that are upgrades, in my view, over what was there before. And then also there's more experience coming back at some key positions. There's more talent coming back overall, in my opinion, when you consider the talent now has more experience. And so you start getting really fired up about what this unit could be. And that's why I think this offense, to me, the expectations for this offense should be, and with all due respect to Coach Denbrock and the staff and the pressure that we're putting on him and all those type of things, the reality is the expectation is that the offense should not be a reason Notre Dame doesn't compete for a championship this year. It doesn't. And if you feel about the defense like I do, and we'll break the defense down later in the week, then you start getting that's where my excitement comes from about this team. That it's right there. Yes, I think the talent's really good, but there's just a greater confidence that they're going to be able to get the most out of that talent. And that's where I get fired up. So that's part 2. Before we move on to part 3, folks, do me a favor, hit that like button, hit the notification bell, subscribe to this channel if you have not already done so. Why have you not done so already? I believe we actually passed 16,000 subscribers the other day. Let me go back and check that out and make sure that is accurate. Yes, we are over 16,000 subscribers to the YouTube channel now, which is pretty awesome. We appreciate you all very, very much. And of course, if you're listening via podcast platform, give us a 5-star review. And as always, sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. So let's talk about part 3. We discussed the expectations for this football team based on where they're coming from and where they need to get to. We talked about what they lost and what they have coming back. Part 3 is going to dive into what is arriving. And that's the final piece, because I will say this. Notre Dame has the returning talent across the board, including quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, offensive line, all of it, to be a really good football team in 2024. But there were a lot more questions about it. Yes, there's talent at quarterback. Is Steve Angeli going to be the guy? Is it going to be Kenny Minchey? Can CJ Carr come in and start as a freshman? The lack of experience that those players have going into the season would be a major question mark. Doesn't mean that they couldn't be successful. Doesn't mean they couldn't win. I think they could win at least 9-10 games with any of those 3 guys at quarterback. when you look at the schedule and what's coming back around them at running back and at receiver and tight end and offensive line. But then you start looking at receiver without any new additions. You look at that saying, boy, you've got a receiving core that has veterans like Jaden Thomas and Deion Colsey, who are talented players. You've got Jaden Greathouse, KK Smith, Jordan Faison in the younger group. And then you're bringing in a freshman class that includes at least two guys, if not three, that can help out right away in Cam Williams and Micah Gilbert. And then, we'll see kind of Logan Saldate's got to continue developing as a player and get stronger. Smaller guys always, you wonder, okay, can they hold up? But athletically and skill-wise has all the ability. So you look at that's a really good group of 8 guys. But the concern would be, but now we're right back to where we were a year ago. It's about the numbers they had a year ago. A lot of young players, can Tobias take that step up? Just like we're going to ask about Greathouse and Faison and KK Smith this year. Can the freshmen come in and help right away? And you also have the same issue you had last year, which is you've got talented veterans, but they're injury prone, right? Deion Colsey, he hasn't been able to stay healthy. Jaden Thomas has not really been able to stay healthy in their careers. And so now you're an injury or two away from bringing right back to where you were this year, where you have a couple hamstrings or a knee or this or that, and all of a sudden you got a 4 or 5 man receiving core, and you're young and you're playing young guys, and you're concerned about, okay, are they good enough to go win you games week after week after week? And the reality is this year they weren't there. And even with better coaching, you still run into that problem. So again, even without the transfers, there was a lot of talent coming back. What the transfers do, however, is they answer a lot of questions on top of adding even more talent to the roster. That includes transfers and that includes high school kids. But where I want to start with this part of the show is by first looking at the transfers. We're going to begin at quarterback with Riley Leonard. I mean, that's absolutely where we need to start. And because at the end of the day, what Riley does this year is going to go a very long way towards determining how good of a football team Notre Dame can be in 2020 and 24. It just is. If he is what we hope he can be, then this team is going to be really, really good. Really good. If he's not, or if he gets injured again, then I think it lowers the ceiling for this team. Can Notre Dame go out there and win 9-10 games if Riley Leonard is just an okay quarterback? Yeah, they got a lot of talent coming back. I expect the defense to be great again. The schedule's, at least on paper, doesn't look to be as tough next year as it is right now. But it's still going to be a battle. If Riley Leonard is healthy and he's the player that I think he can be, or even just close to the player I think he could be, then I think that this team has a chance to make a run. And what I mean by make a run is not just get to the playoff. I mean, get to the playoff and then stack up some W's once you get there. And that's the ceiling for this football team, is to get into the playoff and say, this team has a chance to make a run. Is it championship? Is it although we will find out. And the interesting thing is, there's questions about Riley Leonard, just like there were questions about Sam Hartman and just like there were questions about Jack Cohn. But they're different kind of questions. Where Jack and Hartman came here and they were kind of already established guys, and they'd put up, they'd started for seasons and done things, but it was how would they be able to transition to the Notre Dame offense? Neither of them were super talented kids. They were veterans. They were smart. They were leaders. But how would they transition into the Notre Dame offense? That's a fair question. With Riley Leonard, it's not so much a question about how he'll transition, because of the 3 quarterbacks, if I had to rank who had the smoothest transition from what they were running and what their skill set is into what they will be running, it's Riley Leonard 1, Jack Cohn 2, and Sam Hartman 3. And my initial concern about Sam Hartman when I first heard they were going after him was, I think he's a system quarterback. And then I talked myself into, here's why I think he can be successful at Notre Dame. And in a lot of ways, Sam did have a good season. There's this notion that Sam was bad. He was not bad. You do not have the highest quarterback rating at Notre Dame since Jimmy Clausen if you're bad. You do not have one of the highest yards per attempt averages in program history if you're bad. He just wasn't as good as we hoped he would be. And that was really what the issue was, or even close to being what we hoped what he would be, or what they needed him to be, especially in some of the bigger games. And so to me, when I look at Riley Leonard and you look at what he was, and you look at Jack Cohn and look at what he was, and what the skill set is, and how does that translate into what Notre Dame is going to ask him to do, it was a pretty seamless transition for Jack Cohn. And that's why it's kind of funny when everybody talks about, is Riley Leonard going to go be like another Sam Hartman? And you're like, well, number one, they're completely different types of players. And number two, are we just going to ignore the fact that Jack Cohn was a pretty good player at Notre Dame when he had any kind of line play whatsoever? They went 11-1 with Jack Cohn at quarterback, and the things that he did at quarterback, like this isn't the only transfer quarterback they ever had. Sam Hartman's not the only transfer quarterback they ever had. But the other part is Riley Leonard's a very different player. And with those guys, they were drop back quarterbacks. And so if they were getting pressured by the offense because the offensive line wasn't playing well, or the defense was really good, or if they were in a situation where, the pass game just wasn't rolling, they couldn't do anything. Sam Hartman's not a guy that if the pass game wasn't working was going to lead you to a victory over a really good team. Jack Cohn was not a guy that if the offensive line was struggling or the run game couldn't get going, he in receivers, he couldn't go out there and just put the team on his shoulders the way you need him to. What Riley Leonard showed at Duke over 2 years is if the receivers are struggling, I can do things on my own. If the run game is struggling, I can run the football. If we're just, the system is just kind of breaking down and schematically they're beating us, I can do things that can go make plays. I'm working on a film breakdown, and it's going to take a little while to finish, but I'm going through all of Riley Leonard's his whole career. The only games I'm not breaking down are like Lafayette this year, and I think they played an FCS team last year. But I'm breaking down every other regular season game, and including the ones where he didn't play well. And when you see it, there's just this every game, even games where he doesn't have great numbers, there's some play he makes or 4 or 5 plays he makes where you're just like, that's not coaching. There was a play, I think it was against Northwestern, where there's just 2 guys that just got a beat on him. He spins out, sprints out, makes it look like he's about to take off running, and he can run. And so they come up to get him, and he just throws it over their head for like a 40-yard gain. Like, he does stuff like that pretty regularly the last 2 years. You look at the Clemson game. It's I think it was 7-6. They might have actually been losing at the time. It's the third quarter. It's third down. They're near midfield. He runs right. He gets hit by like 2 or 3 guys at once, bounces off of them, runs up the sideline for like a 40-yard gain, gets him in scoring range, and Duke, I believe Duke takes the lead at that point in time. Like, it's one of those things where you're just like, they can't. The offense is going to break down at times. It just is. And do you have a playmaker that can step up and make plays in those instances? And this is something that I was having a conversation with a buddy of mine about when he was like, well, I didn't like what Denbrock did at LSU. I'm like, why? He goes, a lot of stuff they did was street ball. And I was like, yeah, and what's your point? Like, there was a structured offense at LSU. There very much was a structured offense. They didn't just say snap it to Jalen and just let him go do something. It was, we have a play call, we have this, we have that, but if it doesn't work, you got to go make a play. Yeah, that's going to happen. And when you get into the game, if things aren't working, like, perfect example, take the national title game. Michael Penix, to me, way better quarterback than J.J. McCarthy. But one of the big differences in that game was J.J. was missing some throws. He does that a lot. He's not a super accurate quarterback. I don't care what his completion percentage says. Michael Penix was missing some throws, but J.J. could go make plays in other ways. Michael Penix couldn't in that game. You're going to have games where your quarterback is off throwing the football. Your receivers are not having a good day. They're just not as good as the corners they're going against. Your offensive line's struggling a little bit. You have to be able to put a team physically on your shoulders and say, I've got this. Notre Dame did not have that kind of quarterback in 2023. They didn't have that kind of quarterback for most of 2022. They did not have that kind of quarterback in 2021. They have not had that kind of quarterback in a while. And for all of you folks that love Ian Book, to me, Riley Leonard is a taller, faster, maybe not faster, more athletic, more dynamic, more gutsy quarterback that is a similar style to what Ian Book was. But I think has a more natural passing ability and more guts to attempt throws that Ian didn't. And so to me, but what made Ian Book good is and made him win, could helped him win, was he could go make plays with his legs and arm combined in those clutch situations or in those tough situations. And that's to me what Riley Leonard brings to the table. Now, can he put it together and be effective at Notre Dame? Don't know. We don't know the answer to that because guys, we watch college football and we see guys like Bo Nix and Michael Penix and Caleb Williams transfer to places where they knew the offensive coordinator. They transfer and they make a smooth transition. We've seen other guys that have transferred schools and make really smooth transitions and things just kind of get rolling pretty quickly for those players. And then we've seen other quarterbacks that don't play so well in year one and they're not as effective in year one. And maybe they need more time to kind of get rolling. What will Riley Leonard be? I don't know the answer to that. But to me, when I look at Riley Leonard and I start kind of thinking about what this football team can be, I always go back to one moment and how that one moment might have changed this entire season for Notre Dame. And there's never like one play, but I do that cost you or does this, but I do think there are times during the season when you have opportunities to say, I have an opportunity here to do something and I'm going to go do it, or I'm going to make this play here. And what it says about your football team. And I go back to the Stanford game in 2012. And I think of the offense is struggling and somebody needed to step up and make a play. And Everett Golson lets loose of a ball and it's a gritty throw and Tyler Eifert goes up and makes a great play. And that kind of changed the course of that game a little bit. You go back to over the years and you think about Will Fuller in 2015 where, USC had just dominated you the year before, embarrassed you the year before. You want payback. They get the ball first. They go right down the field and score. It's like 2014 all over again. Somebody's got to step up and make a play. Will Fuller, Deshaun Kaiser did that. First play the next series, touchdown, and then that game kind of changed. And you always kind of go up to those things. But when you look at the offense, I think back to the first drive of the game. And I think back to that 4th and 1 opportunity. And again, I'm not trying to crush Sam Hartman or make it seem like he was this terrible player and do all sort of this, he didn't live up to expectations, so he sucked kind of revisionist history that we have a problem that we do too many times. But I think back to that first drive of the game, and I think back how Notre Dame forces a punt of Ohio State. They get the ball at their own 11-yard line, and they go down the field 13 plays, 71 yards. They get to a 4th and 1 at the 18-yard line, and the quarterback gets out of the pocket. Play breaks down. The receivers aren't open, and your quarterback's got to go make a play. And Sam Hartman did not hunt for the first down sticks. He did not do what was needed to make that play. And I say to myself, the one thing that I can say for sure, of all the uncertainty about the newcomers and Riley Mills or Riley Leonard, the one thing that I can confidently say is if Riley Mills gets into a situation like that against Ohio State, 4th and 1, 18-yard line going in, if you can kick the game off with a touchdown drive against the Buckeyes that takes almost over 8 minutes off of the clock, boy, that's pretty huge. That's pretty huge. But you've got to have a quarterback that can make that play. And I think Riley Leonard, I have no doubt that Riley Leonard makes that play. And whether he's fast enough to just beat the guy to the spot, or he puts his shoulder down and says, you're not stopping me from getting a first down. You're not. Look, you can come meet me at the sticks, but we're going that way. We're not going this way. We're going that way. And that, to me, that's where you need to be. And that's part of that, that's part of what makes a great offense. You have to have the ability to make plays when things don't go to plan. Sam Hartman very rarely had that ability. I mean, he could scramble outside and the sideline is there and he just runs untouched for the touchdown, right? I mean, he could do that. I'm not talking about that. Anybody can do that. I'm talking about where you've got to go make a play and several plays to say, hey, we got this. 2019, Ohio State, Clemson. Ohio State as a team was kicking Clemson's butt that night. and the receivers weren't getting off. I mean, just physically, the Ohio State receivers were beating up the Clemson corners. Now, you could argue, oh, maybe we should have called more pass interference. Whatever. That's how the game was being called. I thought they played great. They were better than the Clemson receivers that day. And so Trevor Lawrence just said, I got this. And he went out and starts making plays with his arm, legs, moves the ball up and down the field, makes that I'm going to put this team on my shoulders and go. Is Riley Leonard going to be that guy? I don't know. I have no idea. We'll have to see. Does Riley Leonard have the talent to become that guy? Yes. And that's what gets me fired up about this season, is because he has the potential. He doesn't even have to play out of his mind. If he just repeats kind of close to what he did in 2022, where he threw for 2,900 yards at Duke and rushed for 699 yards at Duke and accounts for 33 touchdowns, if he just repeats that level of production at Notre Dame this year, they're going to be hard to beat. Very hard to beat. I mean, that's what he did. He had 3,666 yards of offense that season at Duke. He had 33 touchdowns that season. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. If you look at Notre Dame this past season, their starting quarterback had 2,812 yards of offense this past season. The year before, their two starting quarterbacks combined for about 2,900 yards of total offense. 2021, 3,050. 2020, 3,300. 2019, 3,580. 2018, Brandon and that was, you'd have to go back to 2018 when Notre Dame went 12-0, went to the playoff, to find a quarterback tandem. That year was a tandem. It was Ian Book and Brandon Wimbush, who both started games. They had over 3,800 yards passing or total offense that season. That's the last time a Notre Dame quarterback has had more total offense than what Riley Leonard produced in 2022 at a Power 5 school. So we've seen him do it. Now you ask yourself, what can he do at Notre Dame, or have better linemen, better running backs, better receivers, better tight ends, and a better defense? That's where you start getting excited about it. And here's the thing. The difference between Riley Leonard and Sam Hartman, forget the size and style of play and all those type of things. Forget all that conversation, because that's not the point of what I'm trying to say here. What I'm trying to say is this. It's, do you have to do anything different at Notre Dame than you did at the place you came from? That's the difference. And when you look at Sam Hartman, he had to change what he was at Wake to fit into the Notre Dame offense. If you look at the way that Mike Denbrock ran his offense at LSU, and you look at the way he ran his offense at Cincinnati, and you look at the way he ran his offense in 2015 at Notre Dame, you look at it and say, that's exactly what Riley Leonard can do and does. That's the difference. That's why Jack Cohn was better than Sam Hartman, in my opinion, because Jack was able to transition into an offense that he already kind of fit. When you look at Riley, he's transitioning into an offense, the way they're going to run this offense, that fits who he is. So when you ask yourself, can Riley Leonard match the production he had at Duke? My answer is, at the very minimum, I think he can do that. Well, Sam Hartman came from the ACC, and he couldn't match his level of production at Notre Dame. And I say, very true. It's a good counter argument. The difference, again, is Riley Leonard is transitioning to an offense that doesn't require him to change his game. All Riley Leonard needs to do is just continue improving his game. Be better with your footwork. Be a better decision maker, right? You know, do these things that you would have had to continue to improve on, even if you stayed at Duke and had the same staff at Duke. It doesn't require him to alter his game, alter his technique, change the way he plays at all. Be you, and then trust these guys around you. To me, that's why I am fired up about Riley Leonard. On top of the fact I think he's immensely talented as a quarterback. So, you know, that's kind of where I'm kind of excited about where what that addition can do for the Notre Dame offense. But here's the thing. He's not alone. Spent a lot of time talking about the quarterback, but he's not alone. He's not the only guy that Notre Dame added. Here's Notre Dame Here's the other two things. Notre Dame's adding 3 wide receivers on offense. You've got Chris Mitchell. I'm just going to go in order of when they committed. You've got Chris Mitchell, you've got Bo Collins, and you've got Jaden Harrison, transferred in from Florida International, Clemson, and Marshall. So you talk about returning production for this past season, and I told you all what Notre Dame returns on offense from last season. So let me find it here real quick. So Notre Dame this past season returns. Let me find that number here real quick. So you have, let's see, 37-24. So Notre Dame brings back about 1,700 yards in receiving. They bring back 124 catches, and they bring back 20 touchdowns from this past season. They're adding 130 catches, 2,038 yards, and 10 touchdowns. They're adding to the offense this season. So when you look at what was the 2023 production from the receivers that played at Notre Dame and the the FBS receivers that are coming in, what's the level of production that they had just last season? Not career numbers, just last season. Notre Dame is bringing back at tight end, running back, and receiver a group of players that caught 254 passes for 3,724 yards and 30 touchdowns. That's what Notre Dame is going to have on their football team next year. Now, for proper context, you have to be willing to admit that not all those guys did it at Notre Dame. How are they going to play together? Can you spread the ball around? All those things are very fair questions. But when you talk about experience and proven production, you are going to have a receiving core and tight end room and running back room that in 2023 at the FBS level combined for 254 catches, 3,724 yards, and 30 touchdowns. That's what Notre Dame is going to have next year because of the arrival of Chris Mitchell, Bo Collins, and Jaden Harrison. And the funny thing is Jaden Harrison was the least productive guy last year at Marshall. He had, I think, 28 catches for, 28 catches for 410 yards last season. The funny thing is, even with that light of production, he'd have been number 2 on the Notre Dame offense at the Notre Dame receiver room in receiving yards last year and number 1 in catches for Notre Dame last year. And he is by far the least productive guy of the other two. I think not by far. I mean, Bo Collins was somewhat close to what he did. Last season, Bo caught let me find Bo's production from last season. Give me 1 second because I don't have that number here. All right, so Bo Collins at Clemson had 38 catches for 510 yards, so 100 yards more, 10 more catches, and 3 touchdowns last season. And then Chris Mitchell last year for Florida International had 64 catches for 1,118 yards and 6 touchdowns. And his 6 touchdowns were half of that team's receiving yards. And like that to me was something that really stood out to me, is when you look at his numbers, you're like, yeah, it's pretty good. Like, he's playing at the group of 5 level. But when you look at the team's total production in the pass game, I'm going to remind you again, he had 64 catches for 1,118 yards and 6 touchdowns. As an offense last year, they only passed for 2,700 yards and 12 touchdowns. So he did that in an offense that didn't throw much, and he was the primary weapon. And so when I look at it, you say, boy, that's a lot of production. Can he do that at the Power 5 level? We'll find out. But we do know that last year he played 1 game against a Power 5 team. He played against Arkansas. They went to Arkansas and lost. He had 6 catches for 157 yards against an SEC team, right? That did Arkansas? No, they didn't play in a bowl game this year, did they? I don't think they did. Let me go look real quick. I don't think Arkansas played in a bowl game this year. I don't remember them playing. Yeah, they went 4-8 this year. But he went on the road against an SEC team and had 6 catches for 157 yards. So he's done it at that level. And that to me is you're getting excited about it. and you start thinking about like, well, okay, well, how do they fit together? How do these newcomers fit together? And to me, I think they fit fine. I mean, when you look at the depth chart next year at running back, I'm actually going to pull this up so we can take a peek at it. What I would argue is because of the newcomers that Notre Dame has, I would argue that Notre Dame this season. So I'm going to pull up the depth chart that I started working on, or that I have at Irish Breakdown that I did last week. When you start looking at the depth chart, to me, this team has a lot more, in my view, guys that can thrive outside than they had last year. So when you talk about newcomers, look at the Z and X receivers, which are the two outside positions. Z is the field outside receiver. X is the boundary receiver. You have a lot more size in the boundary now than you did most of last season because of the injuries. So you didn't have Deion Colsey, but for 3 games, you add 6'3", 210-pound Bo Collins. You had 6'2", 205 Micah Gilbert. You had 6'2", 195 Cam Williams. You had 6'1", 175 Chris Mitchell, all to the outside. That, number one, allows Jaden Greathouse to be a bit of a swing guy. He can play outside and inside. It allows Jaden Thomas, hopefully, to move around because you've added a lot of size. I actually think this receiving core fits together better now than it did last year because of what you have. Now, I don't have Jaden Harrison on here because he committed after that. But to me, he's a slot guy, so you'd put him at that F position with Jordan Faison and KK Smith and Logan Saldate. And so when you talk about what this receiving core can be, part of it is, guys, it's just not about bodies. You got this guy and this guy and this guy. Can they play together? Can they fit together? That's a big question. And last year they had a lot of guys with very similar skill sets. Outside of Tobias Merriweather, who was a pure outside guy, a lot of the other receivers, Rico Flores, Chris Tyree, Jordan Faison, Jaden Thomas, Jaden Greathouse, you looked at all of them and you're kind of like, their best position is all at slot. Whereas this year, Greathouse will be better prepared to play outside, but you have Jaden Thomas but you got Colsey as an outside guy, Chris Mitchell's an outside guy, Bo Collins is an outside guy, and Cam Williams is an outside guy. So you lost your only outside guy from last year in Tobias Merriweather, but you've now added 4 new players to the roster that are outside, like that fit outside at receiver. And you kind of look at Deion Colsey that way as well, because even though he's not a new guy, you didn't have him for the last 10 games of the season. And so those are things that I look at and I say just the makeup of the receiving core this year is a lot better than it was last year because of the newcomers. We talked a lot about the transfers, but you're also adding Cam Williams. To me, as long as he's healthy, Cam Williams can help you right now. Micah Gilbert can help you right now. And we also can't ignore that KK Smith is like landing a newcomer. I mean, he didn't really start practicing until like way late in the year and in the bowl prep. He wasn't available for the first 12 games of the year. So it's almost like with KK Smith, it's almost like he was a mid-year transfer that Notre Dame was able to get available for the bowl game. That's kind of how you have to look at it when you compare this year's receiving core to last year's receiving core. And so to me, there's a lot of new bodies, a lot of talent at that position. You also talk about newcomers for this year. You look at the running back position, and Aeneas Williams and Kedron Young are outstanding players. They're also additions to this offense. And so to me, when you look at what Notre Dame is adding talent-wise, I'm excited enough about what's already coming back. When you add a Riley Leonard, a quarterback, when you add Chris Mitchell, who can be a vertical player, but where he's different than Tobias Merriweather, Tobias was just kind of a pure vertical guy. I mean, a lot of his production was like, go routes. He caught a 70-something yard touchdown on a go route against Central Michigan. He caught stuff on like post routes. He had an inside post against NC State that went for like 40-something. He had an inside post against his first touchdown pass against Stanford last year was on a post route. He caught a post route against Pitt for a big play. He caught a post route against Wake Forest for a touchdown. He should have caught 2 post routes for touchdowns against Stanford if he'd got the ball. Like, it was kind of like he had like 2 routes that they would throw him the ball on. Chris, I'm not saying it's his fault. That's just the reality of it. With Chris Mitchell, he does screen game, he does quick game, he does crossers, he does overs. I mean, one of his most impressive catches was running a seam route where he kind of catches the ball between 3 guys, bounces off somebody, and takes off running. So he brings a very different skill set to the table as a route runner, not from what maybe Tobias could have been, but what he was. We can only go off of what a guy was. when you look at what he adds, when you look at what Bo Collins adds, again, an improved route runner over what you had. He gives you more size than what you had in the boundary for most of last season once Dion got hurt. And and then of course Jaden Harrison adds a shorter, dynamic speed guy. And when I look at Jaden Harrison, to me, it's like if he brings anything at receiver, that's great. The benefit to getting Jaden Harrison right now is he can be a kick returner, and if he can show himself to be a big time kick returner, which he was at Marshall, was a first team All American. Does that translate to Notre Dame? Well, depends on how good the blocking is, right? But he's got the ability to do that. To me, what it comes down to is, can he take that job and then take some of the burden off of Jadarian Price to allow Jadarian to be more focused on just running back, which would be huge. Because if Jadarian can take the kick return off of his plate, he's going to get a lot more touches next. He only returned the ball 10 times last year. But if you can take the practice reps and all that focus off Jadarian and allow Jaden to handle that, now you've helped the running back room get better. Then any value he brings a receiver, to me, is an added bonus. That's kind of how I look at Jaden Harrison. And if he can and if he does, that's great. But it's a potentially impactful transfer class at receiver. Now we have to see how. Now they're the ones that have to make a transition. They are transitioning into an offense that is going to be a little different than what they did. I think Bo Collins fits the Notre Dame offense better than he fit the Clemson offense. I've said this for years. I've said this since his freshman year, before he even signed, before he even played a snap for Clemson. I always said, I don't know why he made that move. He does not fit that offense. I think Bo fits what especially now. Here's the other thing too that's interesting. Chris Mitchell and Bo Collins were needed pickups when Jared Parker was going to be the OC. The thing, however, is when you look at Jared Parker's offense of what it was last year, now this may have changed in 2024. I don't know. We only saw what it was this year. It was a very slot-driven offense, and that means tight ends and slot receivers. A lot of the production that they had last year came from inside. The outside guys were just complementary pieces. They were rarely features of the offense. Mike Denbrock's offense is the exact opposite. It is an outside-driven offense where the inside guys are more complementary, but he'll use the inside a lot more than what we saw the outside get used last year. Now, again, that may have just been because of the nature of the offense, guys you had missing, all those kind of things that could all factor into why the offense was that way. It's really irrelevant as to why. I can only go off of what we saw and what it was and how it improves. And so when Mike Denbrock was hired, immediately it made the pickups of Chris Mitchell and Bo Collins even more important. And for those players, it made Notre Dame an even better fit for them than even before. Because before with Chris Mitchell and Bo Collins, it was, well, here's what they add that you didn't have. Hopefully they'll use it. Now it's like, well, look what Mike Denbrock did at LSU. Look what he did at Cincinnati, and look what he did at Notre Dame. Those two outside positions are very, very important. They now fit into where they were complementary players to where you got to be a guy outside. And so I think that adds a lot of value to their pickups and makes Notre Dame an even better fit for them than they were before. But they also both have transitions to make in regard to the scheme and the emphasis. Garrett Riley's an air raid guy. Mike Denbrock's more of a pro style guy in his route game. Chris Mitchell, I couldn't even describe to you what Florida International's offense was. It was an odd offense, but it was kind of spreadish in the routes that they would use. But there were some pro style concepts that he would do. But they're both going to have transitions to make scheme wise and technical wise. But I think they'll make them fine. I mean, that's a position. Receiver's a little bit easier to transition than quarterback, in my opinion, because there is some carryover if you have a big change to make a quarterback. Because I do think there's some carryover for what they do. And I think the final piece is that I ask is, do they have guys? Here's my one question mark at receiver. And I don't know that I think the newcomers can help with this, but we need to see it. Is Notre Dame needs more guys can make plays once the ball's in their hand. And that's going to be the one question mark to have to find out about them. So as you can tell, I'm pretty fired up about the portal additions and the high school additions. We've talked a lot about Cam Williams and Micah Gilbert, so that's why I didn't spend a ton of time on them. And but you look at it, there's a lot of talent, man, coming back. There's a lot of talent coming back. There's a lot of talent coming in. at the end of the day, this should be a really, really talent won't be an issue for Notre Dame next year. And I'll get into that more in this final section. Actually, you know what? I'm just going to kind of quickly work through that now because we're a little long. I'm not going to make that its own section. I'm just going to do these things right now. Kind of my biggest question marks and the strengths I anticipate coming into Notre Dame. And we'll kind of have these conversations as we move forward. Number one, I'm going to do question marks. My biggest question mark is more, and questions don't always mean concerns. It can sometimes just mean the unknown. What does the offense look like under Mike Denbrock? What I like about what Mike Denbrock did is his Notre Dame offense, his Cincy offense, and his LSU offense all looked different. There were core principles that you see through all the time. They're going to run inside zone. They're going to do this. They're going to do that. But there's changes. There's adaptations to what they do based on what their talent is, the unique skill sets that they bring to the table. How will Mike Denbrock use this group of players? It's an unknown until we see him do it. It's not a concern. It's just an unknown because we've seen him make smooth transitions and improve groups and all that. But what's his vision for what this offense is supposed to look like with this group of players? We don't know the answer to that. Question number two, how good's the offensive line going to be? I think it's going to be solid next year, but can Joe Rudolph have the kind of year two jump with his group that Al Washington had with his group? Remains to be seen. Can he get the group of five, whoever that is, to kind of play well together? Will he allow there to be legitimate position battles, or are guys like Tosh Baker and even like Pat Coogan, but even a Billy Schrauth and guys like that? Is he going to allow? Is there going to be real position battles, or is it this is my starter, and unless you're a million times better, I'm not gonna not start my guy? I don't know the answer to those things, but the reality is we know that the offensive line has to be better. I think it will be more consistent this year. From an emotional standpoint, just because I think that's something that Marcus Freeman's going to be focusing on. But technically, can they be more consistent? Assignment-wise, can they be more consistent than they were this year? We're going to find that out. I don't know the answer to that. But I do think being in year two, we're going to see some improvements in those areas with Joe Rudolph. That's my hope. Number two is what's the transition going to be for Riley Leonard? I talked earlier in the show about how I think the transition should be smoother, but that's more of a that's more of a skill set standpoint. It's more about how does he transition into the offense? The terminology is going to be different. The players are going to be different. I mean, he's got a whole new team around him. The only guy he's going to know from this team is the guy that plays defense. And so there's always a transition there. I think his skill set transitions just fine, but it's the other can he pick up the offense? Can he get on the same page with the receivers? Can he become a leader? All those things have to be answered. Number four, who steps up, right? I mean, that's a big thing is they're going to need guys to step up this year. Who's going to look, they got a lot of talent coming running back, but who steps up to be the guy or the two guys? There's a lot of potential receiver, but who becomes the dude? Who becomes that guy in big games when the game's on the line against A&M or Florida State or USC or Georgia or Bama or Ohio State or, whoever you're going to, Texas, whoever you play in the postseason, who steps up in those big moments and says, I got this? And it can't just be the quarterback. You've got to have other guys stepping up with you. Who does that at running back? Who does that at receiver? Can Mitchell Evans repeat what he did? Because he was that guy for the offense this year. Can he get healthy and be that guy again? Those are all question marks. And then number five, this is an obvious one. How are they going to play in big games? I mean, I'm hopeful, I'm optimistic that they're going to be better, but how will they really? I don't know the answer to that. That's something they have to prove it. No matter what you think of Mike Denbrock or what you think of Riley Leonard or the returning players or the incoming players or the talent of the team or any of those kind of things, the reality is that we should all be in show me mode when it comes to the offense. They got to show me that they can play well in big games. Am I optimistic about it? Absolutely. But they got to show me. And that's going to be the big thing. 5 things that I'm most excited about, that I'm confident in. Number one, Mike Denbrock. I mean, guys and gals, you've heard me talk on the show for years about my respect for Mike Denbrock as an OC and the job I think he can do. He's done it. He's proven it. I mean, again, they played, I think, against like 9 ranked opponents the last 2 years at LSU, and they averaged over 33 points a game. If Notre Dame would have averaged over 33 points a game this past season against ranked teams, at the very worst, they're 11-1. Maybe they don't get enough to beat Louisville, but they would have beat Clemson and they would have beat Ohio State if they could have got to that 33 point per game average. There's 33.6, so you could round it up and say they beat Louisville, but that's a different story for a different day. I think they would have. That's a number you want to see repeated by Mike Denbrock at Notre Dame and I'm confident that it will be. We just got to see it. Number two, there's a lot of talent and a lot of depth on this football team. A lot. I mean, the funny thing is I think just God-given athleticism. You could argue there's more talent all around on offense than there is on defense at Notre Dame, and not just skill. I'm talking up front. I mean, with all due respect, if everybody on the football team reaches their full potential, I don't know that any of the Notre Dame defensive linemen have a chance to be drafted as high as Charles Jagasaw could get drafted if he develops over the next 3-4 years, 2 to 3 years at Notre Dame. Those are all things that you look at and you start getting kind of excited about. The talent's there. The depth is there. They don't need – it's not a thing where if Jeremiah Love doesn't step up, boy, you're screwed because the next guy's not that good. Or if Jordan Faison can't repeat what he did as a freshman, or if Jaden Greathouse isn't this guy, or Jade Thomas doesn't do that, or Pat Coogan doesn't get better, all those things. Hey, if Riley Leonard gets hurt or doesn't get the job done, it's not like you're turning to Devin to Drew Pine or Pat Dillingham or some of the other backup quarterbacks that I've had to turn to in past years. True freshman Tommy Reese, who came in after Nate Montana failed, or who was it? Who was Brady Quinn's backup, right? Looking at it to find out, was it like David Wolke? What, right? Jimmy Clausen gets hurt. He can't play as a freshman early on. So you got to turn to Evan Sharpley. Oh, right? Like those are all like, man, that's a big drop off between 1 and 2. The younger quarterbacks are all inexperienced. I mean, even Steven Angeli played. He only threw for 504 yards. That's not like he's got like 2 years of starting experience under his belt. But whether it's Angeli or Kenny Minchie or CJ Carr, there's no doubt that this team has depth of talent to work with, where you're not just putting in a good, smart guy in there. You're putting a guy that's got some ability in the game, and that starts getting you excited. And then number 4, excuse me, I think this has a chance to be the most balanced skill set team that Notre Dame has had in a very long time. They have big-time playmakers at running back. They have big-time playmakers in the pass game. They've got a quarterback that can run the football. I'm very confident that the run game will be very good this season. Will the offensive line be elite? I don't know the answer to that. That's going to me, that should determine whether you're rushing for 190 yards or 230 yards, right? Like, and how good the line is raises that bar. But Notre Dame ran for 185 yards this year with a quarterback that was not much of a threat running the ball. I think he had less than 200 yards. You did that this year with a pass game that was wildly inconsistent against a very good schedule of defensive football teams that I'll get into next is kind of part of, well, my number 5 is schedule. And that factors into the point that I'm making here. You don't play as tough of a defensive schedule next year, at least on paper, as what you had this year. But when you look at the run game, it's just kind of like some of the things that teams did to stop the run game this year, you can't do in 2024. You can't, like what Notre Dame would do is they would go in motion and run like zone or counter and in either split zone or whatever, and they would kind of block that in. And what teams would do is they would just start crashing a nickel, a safety, a linebacker just off that backside edge because they knew Notre Dame was likely not going to bootleg. They were not going to do RPOs, and they certainly weren't running read zone. So you could just crash that backside edge against the Notre Dame run game if you saw motion away. And this year it's like, okay, you try doing that this year, and if Notre Dame has a recall or if Riley Mills just says, screw it, I'm taking it, you're going to be in a situation where the quarterback's pulling the ball and he's running for 10, 15 yards. And if he can make one guy miss, which he can, he may house it. What does that do when you're trying to defend the run? Like, imagine how life would have been for defenses this year trying to defend Audric Estime if you had a quarterback that could run for 699 yards and 13 touchdowns. And what that would mean for you schematically. Think about that. Well, you're going to have that next year with this 3-headed monster at running back that you're going to have. And I'm not even counting the freshmen yet. So I think the run game is going to be good this year. How good? That's to be determined. But I think we're going to see improvement from the run game this season in a lot of different ways. And then, as I said, number 5 is schedule. I think that when you look at this Notre Dame offense, I think it has a chance to be the schedule they face, in my opinion, just isn't quite as good as it was this season. I mean, there's some good defenses on there, like Florida State this season had the number 18 scoring defense in the country. That's a pretty good scoring defense. But two things. Number one, they lose a lot from their defense. And number two is Notre Dame played two teams last year that ranked higher than that. Ohio State was number 2, and Duke was number 16. Notre Dame also played number 25, NC State. When you look at this year's schedule, I'm going through it now. The best scoring defense they play this year is Miami of Ohio, who ranks 7th. And they lose quite a bit. After that, you've got Florida State at 18. Let's see here. Let's look through the list. Let's rest the schedule. I'm to 30. Maybe if they play Army at 30. After that, Louisville at 35, Texas A&M at 36, Navy at 38. So what, 2 top 25 scoring defenses next year, and those teams lose a lot. So I believe that Notre Dame's schedule is conducive to them. The transition is going to be good for them to be able to make that transition. And I know, like, Texas A&M obviously is a game that you look at and say, hey, that's a talented team and all that, but it's still going to be game one for Mike Elko. They did lose a lot from this year's team. So they're going to have a lot of guys to replace. And you look at it and say, after that, you get Northern Illinois, right? Northern Illinois this year had a pretty decent defense at the group of 5 level. They ranked 27th this year in scoring. But that's a team that, again, lost to beat Boston College, but then gave up 35 points in Nebraska, 35 points to Toledo. They're not a real good – I mean, they were good in the MAC. They're not a team that's going to – I mean, if Nebraska scored 35, what's Notre Dame going to do to that defense, right? I mean, that Nebraska was not very good on offense last year. Then you've got Purdue on the schedule. The Boilers this year ranked 104th in scoring defense. And then you play Miami, Ohio, again, who had a good scoring defense. But, guys, they're going to be able to overwhelm those teams just from a talent standpoint. And so you're going to have the concern I would have of this team with new players, with a new quarterback, with an offensive line that's still gelling, with a bunch of new receivers trying to find their role. We don't know when Mitchell Evans is going to be. Is your schedule conducive? And it's not so much who the 12 teams are, but when do you play them? A&M's going to be a battle, no doubt, but they're going through their own kind of rebuilding process a little bit. New system and all that. It's game 1. But then after that, you're going to overwhelm talent-wise your next 3 teams until you get to Louisville. Actually, no, hold on a second. Does Notre Dame play? I always get this backwards. Do they play Louisville first or Stanford first? I think they play Stanford first. No, they play Louisville first. So Louisville's game 5. So after A&M, you got Northern Illinois at home, at Purdue, home against Miami, Ohio. Then you have Louisville. That'll be a test. But then after Louisville, you've got Stanford and Georgia Tech coming up after that. And I've talked to you all a lot about how I really like what Georgia Tech did on offense this year. Defensively, they had problems. They ranked 97th in scoring. They gave up 29.5 points per game this year. And so I liked what they did on offense. But in their losses, they gave up 39, 48, 38, 38, 42, and 31 points in their losses this year. So their defense has some issues. They're going to have to work. And then they gave a 42 to Clemson. So their defense is not good. So Notre Dame's going to have some tests early, but not the kind of brutal schedule that we've seen for past, back in the day. It's like you're trying to break in all these new players, and you start the season off with like Texas A&M, Michigan State, and Purdue. And you're like, good Lord, like that does not allow you to get any kind of a groove. I think this team, to me, has a schedule that's far more conducive to them being able to make a jump and develop and grow and become cohesive before the schedule really ramps up in October, November. And so that's something too that I think is going to be certainly something that I'm confident is going to be a help to this football team this year. So that's going to do it for that part of the show, folks. We're going to have a mailbag coming up next. I'm going to take a quick little break here to kind of breathe and get something to drink here real quick. But we are going to do a mailbag next. Before we do, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast with all of your friends. I really do appreciate that. And of course, if you have not done so, sign up for the message boards at boards.offbreakdown.com. Here's the thing. If you're not a message board person, and I won't read a message board, keep in mind there's a couple things that this involves. Number one is you can join one of the booster clubs, and you don't have to be on the message board. There's no like rule. If you sign up, you have to read X number of posts or I'm booting you off. If you're someone who wants to support Irish Breakdown and you don't want to give super, I've had people say this, I want to support you, but I don't want to give super chats because I don't want Google or YouTube or whoever taking 50% of your revenue. I understand that. The message board is a way for you to support that. If you go to the IB store at the very bottom, there's also a donation page. If you just want to give us, to help us out, to help support what we're trying to build here and support who we are and our growth as a company and all those type of things. That's what that's for as well. There's great conversation. There's intel. There's going to be stats breakdowns, video. Because like when I do the video breakdown of Riley Leonard, it's going to be on the message board only. When I finish up this spring, my breakdowns of the Chris Mitchell and Bo Collins and Jaden Harrison editions, it's going to be message board only. So we're going to have a lot of things this year. A lot more things are going to be message board only things that you're going to want to be a part of. That's I mean, you're gonna enjoy that stuff, in my opinion. So definitely check that out. But if you're just wanting to support Irish Breakdown and what we do, the message board is another way for that, because we get a small fee taken out for the transaction fee through Stripe, but after that we keep all of it. So we keep a huge chunk of that. So that's another reason where joining the message board is not only good for you because you're joining a great community, it's also good for us because you're helping to support what we're doing and the growth that we're trying to have here at Irish Breakdown. So really would appreciate that. And you can find that at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Ladies and gentlemen, it is mailbag time. So we have some questions here. We have a couple super chats coming up that we will start with. But if right now, I will try to get to more questions that are added. But right now, we are going to get to what I do have, and I'll try to start some more if they go. Couple little start off with just a couple people that have given little testimonials. The Macaque 2 was hesitant at first to join the board, but I've been a member for a year now, and it's 100% worth it. Great content and interaction with fellow IB members. Thank you for that. And then Andre Tonsil said, yes, IB boards are the best. Thank you guys very, very much for that. Let's get into the mailbag. And also something I'm also going to be doing a lot more this year is I'm going to start doing a midweek mailbag on the board only, where I'm going to post like, hey, early. I'll try doing it on like Wednesdays, but I may post it earlier in the week. Hey, here's a mailbag, ask questions, and just the rest of the week I'll just answer all questions on the board, and it'll be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to it. I've done it at times in the past, but never consistently, and I'm going to try to start doing it consistently, sort of with the midweek mailbag moving forward. I have a super chat from Raymond Harden. Thank you, Raymond. Happy Tuesday, IB Nation. Hope Ryan is feeling better. Thank you guys for all the hard work. I hope he's feeling better too, and I hope little Rain is also feeling better. So, so definitely hope we get Ryan back here very soon from being under the weather. Tom Connor with a super chat. Thank you, or super sticker. Thank you, Tom, very, very much, even though you apparently did not enjoy the show today. You have been around for a while, and I do very much appreciate your support. You don't have to like all of them, man. It's all good. I still love you, and I still appreciate all your support and everything you've done in your support of Irish Breakdown. Very, very much appreciate that. Brandon McHale, Deuce liked Ole Miss post and changed Instagram profile pic to a pic of him holding his Ole Miss offer. Should we be worried? Brandon, I'm going to have the same answer to this that I always have. I just and it's a twofold answer. Number one, I don't care what guys do on social media. I just don't care. I just don't get into that. Kingston Viliamasa took down his Notre Dame commitment post and he's liking Ohio State posts, and okay, if he flips, he flips. I mean, I just don't really care anymore, to be honest with you, about following things that way. I just don't. I mean, you look at his Instagram page, there's still a bunch of Notre Dame stuff on there. So he added an Ole Miss thing. Okay, maybe he thinks the photos are sweet. If he starts taking visits, I'll get worried. But should you be worried about what a recruit does? No, never, ever. You should never be worried about it. If he flips, they'll get somebody else. I don't want him to flip. I think Deuce is an excellent player. I think he's a great leader. And all I can tell you is kids are committing to Notre Dame right now because of Deuce Knight. So do you want your emotions to be based off Deuce's actions, which right now are only visiting Notre Dame? He's going to be back this weekend. He's going to sit down with Mike Denbrock. He's recruiting players to join him at Notre Dame. He's tweeting about guys joining Notre Dame, but you're worried about him liking Ole Miss post or something like that. Like, I mean, I get, I just don't care what he likes or whatever. I know his actions are he's recruiting kids to join him at Notre Dame. He's only visiting Notre Dame. If he starts taking other visits, okay, whatever. It is what it is. But if he makes that choice, he makes that choice. I'm not worried about it. If he does it, you can go find another quarterback. I hope they don't ever have to get there. I just don't care. I mean, this whole process, and this is where players, the way that recruiting is like they got to be careful because it gets to the point where if this stuff just keeps going down, and this isn't about Deuce because I have no reason to be worried about Deuce, none, because his actions tell me he's a kid that's fully committed to Notre Dame. If his actions change, okay, we'll address it. But it's getting to be such a business where people just are stopping caring about recruiting as much as they used to, which then hurts these kids because if people don't care about recruiting, like whatever, let me know when they sign, then there's not the same engagement and all this other kind of stuff. I just don't care, Brandon, and Braden, and I don't mean any disrespect to you. I mean, if you want to be concerned about those things, buddy, it's a free country still as of now. Maybe that changes someday soon. Who knows? But as of right now, you can worry about whatever you want to worry about. It's all good, man. I'm not coming down on you. It's just, I just don't care. And there's been kids who changed their Instagram profile pic to whatever else. And it didn't mean a hill of beans, right? Kingston gets rid of his Notre Dame commitment post and it didn't mean a thing. Other guys, it does mean something. I don't care. I mean, he's either going to sign with Notre Dame or he's in, and there's not a dang thing I can do. There's not an ounce of worry that I can have. There's not a single story I can write or anything like this to me that is going to change his mind. There's no worry that you can have that's going to make him change his mind. It is what it is. And so if you have no control over it, it's not something you should be worried about. That's just my opinion. But I do not believe Deuce Knight is afraid of competition. I don't think he's worried about portal guys or any of that stuff because he's going to have competition and portal guys wherever he goes. If he's like, well, I don't want to go to Notre Dame because they take portal quarterbacks. Guess who starts at Ole Miss right now? A portal quarterback. Their last two quarterbacks, I believe, for what's his face? I'm drawing a blank here. Lane Kiffin. I believe his last two starting quarterbacks at Ole Miss were all transfers. Now, again, one of them he didn't land. But Jackson Dart transferred from USC, and Matt Corral transferred from USC. So those are all guys that transferred from somewhere else. Or actually, maybe he decommitted late. But Jackson Dart's going to be a 3-year starter this year. He was a portal guy. Lincoln Riley's had some success with portal guys. So Lane Kiffin's had success with portal guys. I mean, where's he going to look that like honestly, what team in major college football right now has not had a portal quarterback in recent years? Georgia. I mean, you could count Stetson Bennett from a JUCO, but he started at Georgia. And, Alabama, right? I mean, they want to tile in 15 with a portal quarterback. Okay, they're losing to teams with portal quarterbacks. I mean, Michigan's had multiple portal quarterbacks start for them. Obviously, the kid from Iowa, you had Willie Korn. Not Willie Korn. What's the kid's name? O'Korn from Houston. He went there. USC's had portal quarterbacks. Ole Miss has had portal quarterbacks. Florida's had portal quarterbacks. LSU's had portal quarterbacks. Oklahoma's had portal quarterbacks. I mean, where are you going to go that Ohio State's had portal quarterbacks? Justin Fields was a portal guy. I mean, Tennessee's had portal quarterbacks, right? Hendon Hooker was a portal quarterback. Joe Milton was a portal quarterback. Josh Heupel's only ever played portal quarterback so far. I think when Nico started in the bowl game was the first time Josh Heupel has played a non-transfer quarterback at Tennessee, right? So that's it. Clemson hasn't, but where's Clemson going, right? Boom. So, and I forgot Shea Patterson is another one from Michigan. Shea Patterson is another portal guy that they had. So everybody right now is using portal quarterbacks. I mean, so if a kid's afraid of having to compete against a portal quarterback, then his options are going to be very, very limited. And if you know Deuce Knight at all, you know that Deuce is not at all concerned about competition. Why would he have committed to Notre Dame? Forget portal quarterbacks. Why would he have committed to Notre Dame with Kenny Minchey and CJ Carr already there if he was afraid of competition? He wouldn't have. He's a smart kid. So if he flips, he flips. If he doesn't, he doesn't. And not me. The only thing me or anyone in this chat can do is make it worse by sending him DMs, tweeting negative things at him, and all this other kind of stuff. That you can't help the situation at all. That's up for the coaches to do and the other players. But right now, Deuce is not. If the only thing Deuce has done is change his profile pic and put a post on Instagram, that is not at all something that we should be worried about. If he takes a visit somewhere, okay, then we can be concerned. If he stops engaging with Notre Dame commits and uncommitted players, then be concerned. What he does on social media to me is irrelevant because I can find examples in both directions of kids that do things like that and they don't flip or even think about flipping, and kids that do things like that do. Just it's not something I'm going to worry about. It just doesn't. So I appreciate the question. I know you sent me a DM earlier. I just haven't had a chance to get back to it. To me, it's just not something that I really care about on it. And for me, if I didn't need social media for my job, I would not have it. That's how little I care about what people do on social media. I just don't care. I really don't. Next question, and again, Braden, I do thank you for your super chat. Next question is from Go Irish Nate. Will the offense look anything like LSU's did last year, considering Riley Leonard is dual threat like Jaden Daniels? Who has the better arm talent between the Riley Leonard and Jaden Daniels? Well, I mean, that's a little debatable. Riley Leonard has been a quarterback for a year and a half. Jaden Daniels this past year, this was his 5th year as a starting quarterback. So obviously he has a lot more experience. As far as arm talent, I mean, it's comparable. I think Jaden is a more experienced player. I think he, especially this year as a 5th year guy, I mean, he went through his progressions pretty well and kind of knew where to go when things broke down. Arm strength similar. I think Jaden maybe a touch stronger arm than Riley. And so will it look like LSU's though? No, I don't think it'll look like LSU's because I think this team will be a much better running the football to the running backs offense. I don't think they're going to require Riley Leonard to run the way that Jaden Daniels did because the reality is, I mean, Jaden ran for over 1,000 yards this year because he had to. I mean, if he didn't run for 1,000 yards this year and 10 touchdowns, their offense would not have been as good as it was. I mean, their other 3 running backs averaged 5.5, 5.2, and 4.9 yards per carry, 5.3, and so not great on limited carries. Notre Dame's, as I said before, was at 6.4. And when you look at some of their better games of production, I mean, they were, not against great teams. And so to me, that part alone, to me, changes things a little bit for, how they're going to be. Logan Diggs last year was at 5.5 yards per carry. He went for 7.7 against Grambling. He went for 6.9 against Arkansas's terrible defense. Other than that, he was okay, but that's it. So it's the same thing for like Noah Kane. Again, 1 carry for 20 yards against Georgia State, and he was only 4.9 for the entire season. So those are those are the things you look at and say, boy, he's going to get a lot better supporting cast in the run game at Notre Dame than Jaden Daniels got at LSU. But that's because he needed it. He had to. They didn't have the running back room. I mean, they got some decent players, and you guys know I like Logan Diggs as a player, but they're going to be a lot more explosive this year, a lot deeper at running back this year. I think the offensive line is going to be a little better run blockers this year. So you'll use Riley Leonard as a weapon in the run game, but not the way that they did at LSU, where he just had to. I mean, he had really good, also big outside receivers, but because of how bad their defense was, they had to do things at LSU this year that I don't think that you'll do at Notre Dame. Like, I don't know that Mike Denbrock would necessarily want to work at the pace that he did at LSU this past season, but they did that because you had to. I mean, you had to be that kind of team. You had to be a team that was always looking to hit a home run. You were looking to a team that was going to do different things because you had to, because your defense was so bad. That's going to be a little different at Notre Dame because he's going to have a way better defense than he had at LSU. So I think it'll look different. There's going to be certain principles, Nate, that carry over, certain schemes that'll carry over, but just the overall emphasis of how they use the quarterback and how they attacked is going to be different. And I don't know that they're going to throw quite as many just pure like jump ball, go ball type of things, because they had Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas, and I don't know that Notre Dame has that kind of talent on the outside, in my view. So I think it'll be a little bit different. But the overall, and if you look at what he did at Cincinnati, it was different than what he did at LSU and what he did, and different from what he did at Notre Dame. As I said earlier, there were principles that went kind of like in each offense that kind of carried over between each offense, but they were how they got to how they carried out those principles were different based on the uniqueness of the skill players. So those are things that I look at for that question. We have a couple super chats popped up, or one popped up. Todd Brammy 4. How do you like the fit for each Notre Dame transfer? Chosen destination, transfer out, chosen destination, and how would you rank them? I'm not going to rank them, but I will talk about it. I think that's a good question as far as what these guys are doing. So let me pull up the portal comings and goings. Chris Tyree to Virginia, I like that because the way that they use their slot, Chris is going to have to be used in ways that I think his game needs to grow. Can he get to that point in time? We'll find out. But if he wants to be a division, like an NFL wide receiver, he's going to have to grow in those areas and in that slot. I mean, the slot they had last year, didn't he have like 100 catches, something crazy like that? The Malik Washington kid, let me look up his numbers. Like, he had insane numbers this year, and he was their slot guy. He had 110 catches for 1,426 yards and 9 touchdowns. And that's kind of the role that Chris is going to be stepping into for them. And so I think, and he's back to home. He's a high academic kid, so he gets to get a master's degree from Virginia, which is going to be good. Tobias Merriweather at Cal, I think that's a good fit for them. They like vertical outside guys that can stretch the field. I think obviously Cal brings some of that. Braylon James to TCU, I think it's a really good fit. Again, you look at what they did with the Quentin Johnson kid last year, just a raw but vertical guy, speed guy. That's what Braylon brings to the table. I like that fit. Rico to UCLA, I think it's a good fit too. They're going to be a running football team. He's going to be playing against Big Ten talent all year, which is going to be subpar. He's a tough kid, good run blocker, move the chains kind of player that I think Rico. I would imagine Rico moves inside at UCLA, which will fit his skill set better. So I think that's a good pickup as well. Holden States to Tennessee, good pickup for them. I think the way they use a tight end, he gives them some things maybe they haven't had as much of. I like that pickup. Zeke Crow to NC State, I mean, it's fine. No issue there. Nana to TCU, that's more geographical than anything. That's a nice pickup. Aiden Kaneana going to Cal, it's a really good pickup. I like that a lot. I think he fits in really well with what they will do. They need a big, kind of a plugger up the middle. Guy that can eat up space. I think that's going to be good for him. Nolan Ziegler to Central Michigan. I mean, I don't really care what the kid does on the football field. I just want the kid to get his head right and just get his life back on track. That's all I really care about. And, but he's talking about playing both ways. And, that's a place where I think his skill, he'll be one of the most talented players on their team. Ryan Barnes going to UMass. I don't know enough about their defense, but I like that he's going to that level, give him a chance to play. So I think there's a lot of good fits there. Not all of them are great fits. I mean, some of them are just like, okay, whatever. But I think a lot of the kids picked a place that really fits. Like all the offensive kids, I thought all the offensive skill kids, I think are not one of them that I'm like, dude, why are you going there? You don't fit that offense at all. Like I remember when Malik Zaire transferred to Florida, I was like, Malik, no, man, please, no. I just thought there were, and he'll tell you that now too. There were other places that I thought he fit better. I said last year, Tyler Buckner going to Bama was a terrible decision. I did not understand Drew Pine going to Arizona State. I was okay if Tyler wanted to transfer, but I just thought there were better fits scheme-wise. I mean, I thought Stanford would have been a much better fit for him for how he plays. I didn't understand how he fit into the Bama. I mean, he didn't fit into what Tommy Rees wanted to do. Tommy did a good job of using Tyler in the bowl game, but he didn't use Tyler that way during the regular season as much as he should have. So I thought the fits this year are a lot better than they were last year for these portal kids. And that's good for them. It's very good for them, in my opinion. Let's get back up to the top. Iden Banami with a question. Thank you, Iden. Why when we talk about Joe Rudolph, we never talk about his time at Virginia Tech, only Wisconsin? Because he's only at Virginia Tech for a year. It was a new coaching staff. It was a unit that didn't have a lot of talent. It's kind of like the only way to me to really, the only positive, and he wasn't even there a full year as far as like, he was there for a full season, but not a full year, like really a full year. The only reason to bring up his time at Virginia Tech would be if I was looking to bash on him. Like if I don't think he did a good job at Notre Dame, I'd be like, I'm going to ignore all the stuff he did at Wisconsin and Pitt, and I'm just going to focus on that 1 year at Virginia Tech when he had a roster with very limited talent at his position or everywhere else, and he didn't have a lot of time to really instill what he wanted to do. I'm going to use that to really drag him down and kick him and say he's not good enough because he's not Coach Easton or he's not the guy that I wanted or whatever. That would be the only reason for me to bring that up. I just don't think it's really relevant to the conversation. It doesn't trump anything he did at Pitt, Wisconsin. It doesn't trump what he did at Pitt. It doesn't even give proper context to how last year went for Notre Dame. Notre Dame had a much better. I mean, they 19 points to 39 points, and I think at times he had a role in that. At times he didn't. But look, I thought he did a solid job this year. That's it. Solid job. Wasn't bad. Wasn't great. Did a solid job. Next year he needs to do better than solid. And so I just don't think being at a place for a year and it looks different than what you did everywhere else really does a whole lot for you. Sometimes you can be in a place for a year and it's like, well, it gives you really good context. But in his case, I don't think it does. I think it was a very unique situation that doesn't really add any value to who he is or what he does or who he is as a coach. Good question, though. Adam Blair, what do coaches usually do when they visit high schools? Are they allowed to talk to kids or just coaches and teachers? Just coaches and teachers. They cannot talk to kids. I think the only thing you can do is like if you walk by, I think you can say hi, but you can't have any like conversation with them. You can't do anything like that. You can do like a bump, they call it. That's it. You can't do anything like that with them. It's to talk to high school coaches and it's to talk to guidance counselors. And I mean, and it, depending on who the kid is and where you are in your evaluation of him, a lot of times you'll talk to the lunch lady, you'll talk to janitors. Hey, do you know this kid? Oh yeah. I know that kid, man. He's so nice. He's nice. Every time he comes in for the cafeteria, he's always says hi. He says, yes, ma'am. He's a great kid. Or yeah, the kid's a jerk. He's always yelling at people. That's when you really learn a lot about a kid. And to me, I think that's especially at some positions like quarterback. I want to talk to everybody at a kid's high school. I want to talk to the janitor. I want to talk to the people in the cafeteria. I want to talk to teachers he has. I want to talk to the teacher that gave him his lowest grade. I want to talk to guidance counselors. I want to talk to other students that aren't his friends. Hey, random student, come here real quick. Do you know so-and-so? Yeah, I know him. What kind of guy is he? Right? I mean, those are all things that I think are important because the character piece is so important for certain positions, but especially quarterback. I would go even above and beyond in those things. But you can't sit down with that kid and talk to him. You can watch film with the coaches and do all. Now, I do believe if kids are working out, I do believe when it's an open period, and I think we're in an open period now, you can watch them work out. You just can't engage with them. You can't interact with them. And you can't the workout can be for you if you want, but you're not able to like coordinate and do workouts and things like that. Iden says guys who leave don't play football for however long and come. Davis Andrews, Kia's brother. I could be wrong and might be missing something as well. I think you're talking about the mission guys. I don't. I will never understand for the life of me why we're dealing with kids going on missions. Not trying to be rude, but I just don't understand it. We're a top program and we're recruiting. I don't have an issue with it. I mean, BYU, Utah has kids like that all the time. They're really good players. I don't really see it being an issue. If you're bringing a kid in, you think he can play for you, and you think he's a good player, then why not bring him in? I don't think Josiah Kia is going to be I don't think he's doing a mission. I could be wrong on that, but I don't believe he's doing his mission because you don't have to do it right out of high school. Some guys will do it later. Some will do it as adults. Manti didn't do one. I don't know that Josiah is. Kahanu did. And we'll see if it works out. But they like him as a player. So why turn down a kid that you like as a player just because he's going on a Mormon mission when there's a lot of evidence that these kids will go on missions and come back better players? Because here's the thing you got to think about for the kids that stick. So when Kahanu Kia is a senior at Notre Dame, he will be in his 6th year. He'll be a grown-up. I mean, he'll be 23, 24 years old. And that really matters at those physical positions like linebacker and defensive line. And if you like him enough, and here's the thing, it's not about bringing him back for a fifth or sixth year and using that. It's just as a fourth year guy, he'll be 23, 24 years old. I mean, I don't think anything wrong with that. If you think that he can play, go recruit him. And now you've got to make sure that you feel somewhat good about the kid sticking with you. But guys, there's been players all over the country, not just at BYU and Utah, that do missions and are successful players. You just got to find the right fit and find the right guys. Iden Benami, honest breakdown of the Kia commitment. I should ignore the stars, right? I mean, look, Iden, I know what you mean. I don't think you mean it this way, as if we would not give you an honest breakdown of Josiah Kia. We will always give you an honest breakdown. Here's my honest breakdown of him. I don't really have a strong opinion on Josiah right now because there's just not a lot of film. There's very little highlights available. And a lot of them that are like from really far away. I haven't been able to find any game film yet. I just haven't been able to break him down. So I don't have a strong opinion of him. Now, what I do see of him, I see a kid with a nice frame that's got some length and some size to him. He's a pretty good athlete and is a pretty physical kid for his size. Now, there's just not a ton for me to say, hey, this is a sleeper, guys. First of all, you should always ignore stars and just evaluate the player. But I just don't have enough of him to have a strong opinion one way or the other. And I'm hoping that I can eventually come across some more film. But here's the thing that I'll say to you. There's two ways to evaluate a kid that I think are better than star rankings for me. And so I'm going to relay some of what I've learned about this young man that goes beyond star rankings and if you don't have film. And one is to talk to people you know and respect and get their opinion. And then the other is to look at the offer list. And so, yes, he's a 3-star kid, but he had a Notre Dame offer, who's one of the best defenses in college football, done a pretty good job of evaluating players. He's got a Texas offer, a USC offer, an Oregon offer, a Washington offer, a Utah offer, a Nebraska offer. And that Michigan State, Arizona State, Washington State, Cal, BYU, and Vanderbilt. That's a pretty darn good offer list for a kid who's a quote-unquote 3-star. It's a very good offer list. And when you look at Notre Dame this past season, again, guys, they've recruited linebacker really well under Marcus Freeman. This staff has no problem recruiting top linebackers. So if they're willing to push for and there's a ton of top linebackers in this class that like Notre Dame a lot. I could list you 6 or 7 guys right now that like Notre Dame a lot, that Notre Dame is in the top 3 or 4 with a chance to go get. And even with that being true, they still pushed hard for this kid. And it's not to keep Kahanu. I mean, they like Kahanu Kia. There's no doubt about it. But like, if he's going to leave because his brother's not coming, then leave. You know, I mean, that it's because they like Josiah. There's no doubt they like Josiah. I was speaking with someone the other day who has watched the kid's film, and here's the comments that I got from him. And because this person is also familiar with his brother, and so I asked him. I said, what do you think of him? He said, look, he's a better player than his brother. He's a money player. He can pass rush. He's a lot more twitchy and violent than his brother. And this person thought Kahanu was a really good football player. And so I've talked to people that I know someone who's a pretty good evaluator who lives out in Hawaii. And he said the same thing. He's like, this kid's a really good football player. I'm not as familiar with him as I am other players, but like from what I've seen of this kid, he's a really good football player. So right now I'm relying on the offer list and those evaluations for me because I don't have and there's things about him I like. His brief highlights didn't blow me away like Manti's did. But again, that's junior film and there's just not a lot of it. And so I just try not to evaluate, to form strong opinions on a kid that I can't do a thorough film evaluation of. And so right now, until I get that, I'm relying on some other things, evaluations from people I know and respect, and then, of course, looking at the offer list. So that's the best I can do for you right now on Josiah, just because I can't give you an honest, thorough evaluation to where I can defend it because of my evaluation. So like in other times when people get upset about 3 stars and they're like this, and I'll be like, you guys are crazy or you guys are wrong. I've seen the film. This kid can do this, 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 and this. Or I may say, yep, I don't agree with you. because I'm not going that way either, where I can say I don't like this pickup, but it's never about because he's a 3-star, it's because of what the film shows. I don't have enough evidence either way. I like what I've seen, but even that is just not a ton. But from what I've heard from people I respect who are really good evaluators, this kid can play. They love his frame. I know I've been told Notre Dame really loves his frame, I should say. And then the offer list is really impressive. Really impressive. And so that gives me enough identity. And what I would encourage you and everybody else to do that doesn't have a lot of film is let's take a step back. Let's evaluate the job that Marcus Freeman has done, evaluating linebackers in his tenure so far, and say, hey, look, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt for now until I have more evidence to feel otherwise. I'm going to give Oregon the benefit of the doubt, Washington, USC, Texas, and Nebraska the benefit of the doubt because this kid's got a really good offer list. They didn't go beat Washington State and San Diego State and Fresno and Boise for this kid. They beat Texas, places he's visited, Texas, USC, Oregon, Washington. Those are the schools that they beat for this kid. To me, without my ability to evaluate it, that tells me something. That tells me something. Good. John A1, going into 2024, who is Notre Dame's most physical lineman? Most physical lineman. Oh boy, of what we've seen this year, it'd probably either be no, because see that would look in 2023 of the guys coming back, it would probably be Schrauf was probably the most physical. Ashton was pretty physical too, but when Billy kicked your butt, he really kicked your butt. He's just got to be more consistent. But I think it's going to be, and he wasn't necessarily in the bowl game. It was start one, he's true freshman. But I think when we get to the end of 2024, we're going to look back and the answer to this, and my prediction, John, is going to be Charles Jagusah. That's who I think it's going to be. I think he's got a chance to be a really punishing offensive lineman. Question from Brian Sakalowski. Brian with a Y. My man. I dig that. I dig that about you. Dig that about you. There is buzz in my hometown of Omaha right now, will obviously be in Nebraska, about Notre Dame. How do you think we stand with Christian Jones? I know Nebraska is not the hotbed for recruiting, but looking good recently. I actually really like Nebraska as a recruiting state. I mean, especially for like linemen and linebackers and physical players. You don't get a lot of Xavier Wattses from Nebraska, but they produce a lot of linemen, a lot of linebackers, maybe not highly ranked guys, but yeah, they're producing more. I mean, gosh, Xavier Watts was from there. You know, Carter Nelson's from there. He's one of the freakiest athletes in the country last year. So it's definitely getting better. Where do they stand with Christian Jones? They're in a good place. I mean, he is not in decision-making mode right now, as far as we know. There are other schools on his board, including Nebraska, that he likes a lot, but Notre Dame is in there. He likes Notre Dame a lot. He's been to Notre Dame on a visit before. Obviously, he has a teammate that's committed to Notre Dame, so there's legitimate interest both ways on this one. Is it enough to land him? We'll find out. I mean, there's a long way to go for a lot of these linebacker ones, but he's in the game. There's no doubt. There's no doubt. Andrew Gilmore with a question. Thank you, Andrew, and very good contributions to the chat today, man. I do appreciate that very, very much. But he asked, why did Brian Kelly fire Mike Denbrock after 2016? Was it fair? Has Denbrock made any philosophical changes since he was last the OC at Notre Dame? So a couple things. Number one, he didn't technically fire him, but Mike Denbrock knew he wasn't going to be able to come back to Notre Dame because Brian Kelly was not going to be allowed to keep his coordinators. And I'll share a story with you about that here in a second. But he left for Cincinnati, but he knew he wasn't going to come back. So technically he didn't get fired. But so I was told this story. And I'm just telling you what I was told by somebody very close to the situation. You know, is it true or not? I wasn't there, but this is what I was told. Remember when he fired Brian Van Gorder and he named Greg Hudson as the D coordinator? But we all knew that Mike Elston was actually running the show. What I was told is that Brian Kelly told Mike Elston, I can't name you D coordinator because then I can't bring you back next year. If you're not, he wasn't going to be allowed to promote from within. This isn't Brian Kelly's choice. This is the reality. If he wanted to be back in Notre Dame next year, these are the realities. You're going outside for your coordinator hire. So if he promoted Mike Elston to D coordinator, then he probably have to let him go or do a demotion of him. So even though Mike Elston, for all intents and purposes, was the D coordinator, somebody else had to have the title. And since Mike Denbrock was still considered the in charge of the offense, even though he was not nearly as in charge in 2016 as he was in 2015, the fact is he was not going to be brought back. Mike Sanford was not going to be brought back because of how bad the season was. Was it fair to Denbrock? No, but there was a lot that wasn't fair to how Mike Denbrock was treated that last year by Brian Kelly that I think really hurt that football team, and then obviously hurt Mike Denbrock, because the guy that had the success he had at Notre Dame should not be going to Cincinnati, with all due respect, when you look at where that program was. But that's the reality of it. That's the reality of it. All right. Let's see here. I think this question is for me. Marcher, he put mailbag on it, but I'm not sure, so I'll answer that here in a few. Andrew Gilmore with another one. How much do you attribute Jaden Daniels' success to Mike Denbrock? Daniels won the Heisman and is now a likely first-round pick. What are your expectations for Leonard after a full year with Denbrock? Well, I mean, he's the offensive coordinator. I think he gets a ton of credit. Here's another reason why I give him more credit about this one is he's had success with these type of quarterbacks before. I mean, Jaden Daniels is the third quarterback that Mike Denbrock's been an OC for 9 years? So he had 2 quarterbacks at Notre Dame in 3 years, right? He was at Cincinnati for 5 years and had 2 quarterbacks. And then he had 1 quarterback at LSU in his 2 years. So if you go back and look at this, at what he has done at those different stops, he has had quarterbacks that produced running the football and were effective running the football when he's had it. In 2017, his first year at Cincinnati, they only had 300 yards and 4 touchdowns at the quarterback position. But the next year, his 2 quarterbacks combined for almost 700 yards and 7 touchdowns. In 2019, Desmond Ridder had 650 yards and 5 touchdowns. The backup quarterback had another touchdown that season and had added 35 yards. So you have almost 700 yards that year. 2020, Desmond Ridder runs for 592 yards and 12 touchdowns. That's the first quarterback that ran for it. Their backup quarterback, Ben Bryant, also rushed for a touchdown that season and 65 more yards. He had over 600 yards rushing that season. 2021, Desmond Ridder had 6 touchdowns. They did not run him nearly as much, and I think that hurt the offense, to be honest with you, and I think part of that was on Desmond. The backup quarterback rushed for 2 touchdowns and 105 yards. He had 460 yards and 8 touchdowns from your quarterbacks. And then in year 1 at LSU this past season, obviously the quarterback ran the ball a decent amount the previous year too, nothing like we saw this year. But even in year 1, Jaden Daniels was their leading rusher with 885 yards and 11 touchdowns. He's just kind of the game he is. And then this year he had 1,100 yards. So the last 2 years at LSU, his quarterbacks led the team in rushing. We haven't seen that before, but we have seen quarterbacks run a lot for him. And I would if you go back and look at Deshaun Watson or Deshaun Kaiser in 2015, that combination of Deshaun and Malik, and you look at the production they had for Notre Dame in 2015, that was a very productive running quarterback room that season. Deshaun had 520 yards, Malik had 103 yards, and only basically a game and a half. And that's 623 yards and 10 touchdowns for an offense that threw the ball a lot that year, and had 2 running backs combined for almost 1,000 yards. So Jaden has just kind of took it to another level. Part of it out of necessity. Number 2, because he's a much more natural runner than any of the quarterbacks he's had. He's a much more natural football player than Desmond Ridder. He's a much more instinctive, natural runner than Deshaun Kaiser was. And I would argue before Jaden, Deshaun was his best running quarterback. As far as – I don't count Malik, because Malik was only there for two and a half games, right? The LSU game, he had the Texas game, and then obviously the Virginia game. So I don't really count Malik, because Malik didn't have enough time in that system to be effective. But I mean, go look what Malik did in his first start for Mike Denbrock. He had 22 carries for 96 yards and a touchdown for Coach Denbrock. And then, of course, had 10 carries for 87 yards in the game against Virginia before he got hurt in that game. And they didn't need him to run against Texas. Although, no, that was LSU when he picked up the 4th down, was against LSU with Malik in 2014. But So I attribute a lot of that. So you said, well, Joe Sloan. That's what else. Joe Sloan, Joe Sloan, Joe Sloan. No, because this is what Mike Denbrock has kind of done everywhere. And we have talked to some of our sources about it, and what they'll tell you is Mike Denbrock had a much bigger role than LSU fans are leading on now. And Joe Sloan didn't have the role that people are leading on now, that Mike Denbrock had a big role in that. I don't know. I'm just telling you what we're told by sources. As far as expectation for Riley Leonard, it's just about how quickly can he pick things up mentally. I don't know Riley a whole lot. I don't know what kind of mind he has. I've heard really good things about him. I think what he did at Duke was good. It was not a super complex offense, but it wasn't super easy either. I mean, he had to learn some stuff. So I think my expectations for Leonard are he's going to be a really good quarterback this year. I think he needs to repeat the production he had at Duke 2 years ago from a total offense standpoint. Now, what I can see for this one, Andrew, is I could see maybe his rushing yards going down like a couple hundred, and they're being added to his passing yards, because I don't think Notre Dame needs him to run for 699 yards and 13 touchdowns. Duke needed him to run for that. They have nice running backs, but they don't have the kind of talent running back that Notre Dame has. It's not really close. They have nice players, but they had two nice players. Actually, they had three nice players at running back, but they're just nice players. Notre Dame has difference makers at running back. So you don't need him. You need him to just be a weapon in certain situations. You need him to pick up, move the chains. You need him to scramble. You may not you may not see as many designed runs with Riley this year that he had in the past. I definitely don't think you're going to see as many as you had with Jaden Daniels, because you just don't need him to. Notre Dame's got a better running back room. They're just in a better situation. And, that to me, that's my expectation. I think he's going to be a difference maker. Is he going to be a Heisman Trophy contending player? I have no idea. And I'm not willing to get into that conversation until after they've beaten a couple really good teams. But production-wise, playmaking-wise, I think he's going to make a lot of plays. I think he's going to put up really good numbers. Is it going to be championship caliber? Don't know. We'll see. But he's got a potential to be, in my opinion. All right. Next question is from Nicholas Grosh. Would it be possible to explain how Notre Dame deals with or uses NIL? How do other schools use NIL? Well, there's a couple different ways. Number one is the collective, the fund, and essentially players get paid through that as part of their charitable time and how they're handling things academically and things like that. It's just basically, you do this and we'll take care of you over here. The other way that they do it is obviously a lot of these kids are getting connected with different companies and different platforms that are hiring them for endorsements and all those type of things. A lot of companies are reaching out to Notre Dame players. I mean, you don't need to promote it, but there's a lot of those things where Notre Dame is trying its best to do NIL the way it's supposed to be done, which is, hey, we're going to do certain things for you where we're going to take care of you, but then we want to put you in contact and get you connected with, through these different outlets with people that are parts of your passion, things that you're interested in. And so that way you can kind of market yourself as well. As far as how getting too deep into it, I don't know that I know enough about the very intricate details, Nicholas, to be able to say this is how they're doing it, but I can give you a general idea. Nathan Indy Milton fan with a super chat. Thank you, Nathan. What movie title best describes Notre Dame's 2023 offense? Almost Famous. Almost Famous. That's the one I'm going to use. Whereas the production was really good to where if you could have done better, like imagine if Jared Parker on the last drive against Ohio State, when they're up, was it 14-10? If he calls that drive, in our opinion, better, and they go down and score and put that game away, and let's say he does against Louisville and Clemson what he did against Pitt and Wake and NC State and some of these other schools, all of a sudden, Jared Parker's getting thrust into this where'd this guy come from conversation like a Joe, not like Joe Brady because his numbers were insane. But if he does those things well, we saw the production in the other 9 games. If he does better in those games, he goes from what he's thought of now to whew, right. So that's the first thing that pops in my head. It's a good question. That's a fun one. It's a fun one. Jim Halloran with a question. Thank you, Jim. Good to see you today, there, my friend. Jim says, Brian, are you talking about the difference between productive and versus efficient? To me, productive is the number statistics. Efficient is what you do. Do you do what you do when you have to do it? Again, I don't think it's both, right, Jim? I mean, to me, statistics mean nothing without context. And so that's why at the beginning of the show, I felt it was important to spend the time looking at the numbers to show the foundation, but then also provide the proper context to understand what those numbers really mean. And so you could score 35 points a game and be a championship caliber offense. You could score almost 40 points a game like Notre Dame did and not be a championship offense. And I mean, look at Michigan this year. And compare Notre Dame and Michigan's offenses this year. Michigan scored 35.9 points per game. Notre Dame scored 39.9 points per game. Right this year, I'm just going to compare the two numbers. It's wild. I mean, because again, you talk about what do numbers tell you? They just tell you like you said, the production. But they don't tell the whole story, which is why I felt it was important to provide context. Notre Dame scores 39.2 points per game. Michigan this year averages 382.7 yards per game, 6.2 yards per play. Notre Dame averaged 432.2 yards per game and 6.95 yards per play. This year, Michigan averaged in the running game 169.1 yards per game. Notre Dame averaged 185.7. Michigan averaged 4.5 yards per play or per carry. Notre Dame averaged 5.3. So when you look at all those different things, you're like, dude, like, why wasn't Notre Dame better? Because Ohio State or Michigan scored 24 points against Penn State, 30 points against Ohio State, 27 points against Bama, and 34 points against Washington. And Notre Dame's big games, they scored 14, 20, and 23. That's the difference. Because when the lights were brightest, they didn't step up. And that's why I felt it was important to kind of dive into that conversation, Jim, to point out, like, the numbers are good. Because, like, here's the problem that you come down to, Jim, when you talk about looking at this past year's offense. It is, you can look at all these numbers that I've presented, right? And say, man, best scoring offense in over 100 years, right? Yards per play, second best by 0.07 away from the best since the end of World War II, right? And you look at all these numbers that were really most points that no Notre Dame team in history has scored more offensive points than this year's team did offensively. So even forget defense and take all those away, they still scored more points than any team in Notre Dame history. And so, to me, you can't ignore that and act like it means nothing. And that's the mistake a lot of Notre Dame fans made, where, they're asking about Jared Parker and somebody jokingly puts, semi-pro. That's so disrespectful. You don't score 39 points a game and do the things they did if your offensive coordinator sucks or is even just below average. It's not possible. Your talent is not that good right now. And so, but you also have to say, but was it good enough? Not even close. But to ignore the lots of good because it wasn't good enough, to me, misses the mark. And so what I've always tried to do in this conversation was say, there were some things Jared Parker did this year that deserve a lot of criticism. The Ohio State game in the fourth quarter, no question about it. The overall Louisville game, the Duke game in the second half, to me, was not good. The Clemson game was not good. There were some things that, and when those things happened, go read our responses, go watch our shows. Very critical of the job he did. But to so over focus on that to miss the fact that Notre Dame scored at least 40 points 9 times this year. You know how many times that's happened in Notre Dame history? 0. No times ever. The most they've ever had is 6 ever. Notre Dame had 6 this year just on offense. And so to me, you can't ignore that either. And that's why I've always said Jared Parker got treated very unfairly by Notre Dame fans. Very. Did he deserve criticism at times? Absolutely. Because your job is to be at your best against Ohio State, against Clemson, against Louisville, against Duke, and teams like that. And they weren't. That's on him. He'll own that. But to then ignore the 45 against NC State, the 42 against Navy, the 56 against Tennessee State, the 48 against USC, the 58 against Pitt, the 45 against Wake Forest, the 56 against Stanford is also missing the mark completely. It's every bit as bad as someone who just looks at the numbers and says Jared Parker was a record-setting offensive coordinator, period, end of story. You're missing some really important context there, my friend. The same is true when people only focus on the few bad games and don't give him credit for all the other things he did. That, to me, is also missing the mark. So, to me, it's not about productive versus efficient. Efficient, to me, is not how I define that. Efficient, to me, is just it's are you making the most of your opportunities? That's what efficient is to me. To me, do you do what you do when you have to do it is not about being efficient. It's about, are you money, right? Are you money? Are you a money player? I mean, you could go back and look at John, my favorite player. Y'all know I love talking about John Elway, right? To me, you could look at John Elway and say, he had some years where you just look at the numbers and say, boy, those aren't great numbers. But then you're like, they made the Super Bowl that year. Why? Because John Elway was a money player. John Elway could suck for 3.5 quarters, but you better not have that be a one-score game in the fourth quarter because you are done. Over. Done. What's the one Super Bowl that the Broncos played in his 5 games where the game was competitive in the fourth quarter? The one. He was terrible. John Elway had less than 100 yards passing going into the fourth quarter of that game. But he went over, and he made some money plays in the second half of that game, right? He was 37 years old. He was on bad knees and all this stuff. But when the game was on the line, he made plays. He was money. He was clutch. Joe Montana's had games like that. You go back and look at the Super. What was it? Was it Super Bowl 20? I'm going to look this up and because I want to make sure that I'm accurate on this Super Bowl box score, because I know the Niners and the Bengals played twice, and I'm trying to remember which one it was. It was 23 is what it was. And I remember that game because if you go back and you break down the game, like Joe Montana was good in that game, but he wasn't great, right? I mean, they were losing 13-6 going into the fourth quarter. But in the fourth quarter, Joe Montana was Joe Montana. You better not let it be close. So even though the numbers aren't going to be great, are you money or not? And then there's other teams and other players where you'll put up a ton of points. Minnesota Vikings, 1997, right? Or 1998. Remember the Broncos' second Super Bowl in 98? Everybody thought it was Broncos and Vikings. That Vikings team was phenomenal. Phenomenal. You had Randall Cunningham at quarterback. You had Randy Moss. You had Chris Carter. You had Robert Smith at running back, like that. Yeah, didn't they have Jake Reed on that team too? Let me go look that up. Yeah, Robert Smith was a 1,000-yard rusher that year. Randy Moss was a 100-yard player. Chris Carter was a 1,000-yard, I should say, player. Yeah, Jake Reed. Jake Reed was on that team that year. And that team was loaded. I mean, they were scoring so many. I mean, here's 31, 38, 29, 31, 37, 41, 34, 31, 46, 48, 38, 50, 26. First round of the playoff, they scored 41. But when the games mattered most, they got beat by the Falcons because they weren't money. They weren't a money team. So to me, that's what it comes down to. I see some of the chats, some of the comments, and some of them are just so absurd that it's like, you have a you problem. It's not a Jared Parker or Notre Dame offense problem. Your inability to see, like somebody's, oh, they ran up against high school teams. That's so childish. That's so childish. And the schedule this year, it's like the people that say that will be the first ones complaining when Notre Dame doesn't get enough. Well, look how tough their schedule is. Well, hold on a second. You just said Notre Dame scored against only high school teams. Okay, which one is it? Pick a lane. The fact of the matter is this offense did some really good things this year. But at the end of the day, I don't care about 39 points per game. I don't care about 6.95 yards per play. Were you clutch when it mattered most? You could score 30 points a game, if for all I care, as long as it's 30 points against the best teams you play as well. And so to me, Jim, I like where your head is at from a standpoint of looking at numbers versus these other things. But it's not so much about efficiency. It's about, are you money? Are you a money player? Are you a money coach? Right? What do I say about James Franklin? I mean, James Franklin is the coach you want 10 games out of the year and on the recruiting trail. That's your guy. Get James Franklin in the big game, though, and there's about 70 coaches I'd rather have. Fair? Brian Kelly is the coach you want against every unranked team in America because you will win. I mean, for his last 5 years, that was a given. Say 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. His last 5 years, I don't think Brian Kelly lost a single game to an unranked team. That is your dude against unranked teams. But in the big moments, Miami, Georgia, right? Last 5 years, Miami, Georgia, Miami, Clemson, Bama, Cincinnati, Michigan. In those big moments, there's 70 coaches that you'd rather have than Brian Kelly because he's not money. He's not clutch, right? He won 2 titles at Grand Valley State because he had the best roster in the country by far. He's done some really good things, but he's not money. And that's the key. And that's what we need to find out if the Notre Dame offense can be. That's the key. Can they be money? I don't know. The thing I'll say, however, is this team doesn't have some of the excuses that past teams had. The 2023 team didn't have a lot of those. I mean, you can point to, okay, well, the receiving corps is banged up, and but there's no excuse for you weren't banged up against Ohio State. You weren't really banged up against Louisville the way that you were maybe against Clemson. Right? There's no excuses for the way you played. Forget you didn't produce. There's no excuse for the way you played in some of those moments. And that's what this offense has got to get to. And so production at the end of the year, averages is one thing, but what did you do when it mattered most? And that's what Marcus Freeman will be judged by. That's what Mike Denbrock will be judged by. That's what Al Golden will be judged by. It's what every other player, everyone part of this team will be judged by. What did you do when the lights were brightest? Because you're at Notre Dame. Those are the moments you come here for. And that's they simply couldn't. They got to get better in those areas. They have to get better. PK with a question. I agree. Player leaders have been lacking over the past 10 years. Can you identify key leaders Notre Dame has had on the defense especially? Oh, yes, absolutely. Key player leaders were lacking this year, maybe the last couple years. I mean, but when I look back at the 2018 team, you had 2 elite leaders on that team on defense. You had Drew Tranquil and Alohi Gilman were phenomenal leaders on that team. You know, you look at the 2020 team, Drew White was a great leader of that team. Jeremiah Sukormo was kind of like lead by example kind of guy. But yeah, I mean, Drew was a very good leader. Kurt Heinrich was a very good player leader. There was a lot of accountability with those guys. So 2012, Manti, Zeke Mata, absolutely great player leaders. No question about it. And so they've had those guys. This team didn't have those guys. There's a difference, in my opinion. Jason Smith, if Steve decides to stay and gives Riley a run in the spring, but Riley ultimately wins the job, will Riley Leonard have a shorter leash than Sam Hartman if they have faith in Steve Angeli? Guys, that's not happening. It's not happening. I mean, in your scenario, Jason, if all these things happen, sure, but it's not happening. It's not close. He's not, because again, Steve would be going into year 3 at Notre Dame. Riley would be in semester 1. I mean, Steve would have to be so much better than Riley and he's not as good as him. It's just not going to happen. I mean, anything can happen, right? I guess, right? But I just don't see it happening. I'd be shocked if that happens. Riley Leonard is brought to Notre Dame to be the guy. And if they had that much faith in Steve Angeli, they wouldn't have gone and got Riley Leonard. And they wouldn't have put the value on him that they did. There's a reason why. So, all right, Jim Halloran with another one. Is this staff better teachers with all the young talent? That would seem essential. Well, the two new coaches, well, at least the receivers coach is. I don't know that Jared Parker's issue is that even as the OC was a lack of teaching ability. I think there were other issues. I think it's a pretty good teacher, especially at tight end. He's a pretty good teacher. I think Dylan McCullough certainly is. I think Joe Rudolph needs to improve in some areas, but he's a pretty good teacher. I think the bigger issue is just more of some of the things they were doing schematically, some things they were doing from situational football. I think those are more important things. ND Milton fan, what movie title best describes BK? Idiocracy. There you go. That's my one for that one. What do y'all think about them apples? Shamrocker, why hasn't there been a formal introduction of Coach Denbrock? There has been through email and a press release. I don't know that they're going to be doing one from a press conference standpoint. They still don't have one decided, and I honestly don't know why. I no clue. No clue why they haven't done that. Unfortunately for all of us, I don't make those decisions. Chris W. with a question. Thank you, Chris. Very, very interesting question. From 1 to 10, what is your confidence in beating A&M in week 1? Yeah, I mean, at this point in time, I just need to get through spring ball. I don't even know who all A&M's going to have right now. They're still chasing guys in the portal. I mean, right now, what's my confidence level? In January, my confidence level is probably a 6 in January because I haven't seen Notre Dame have one spring practice. They've had one winter workout. I don't know who all A&M's going to have. I'll be pretty sure that by the time we get to A&M and we've seen spring ball, we know who's healthy, we know who wins position battles, we know who's at A&M, we know who's at Notre Dame. We get to fall camp, I'll probably feel a whole lot better about my odds will probably go up. But right now it's 6. And part of the only honestly, if Jimbo was still the head coach, it'd be like 8. The only reason it's as low as 6 is because I have a tremendous amount of respect for Mike Elko as a football coach and a leader. That's the only reason it's as low as it is. Chief Brody, do you think Riley Leonard will be accurate enough in the RPO game? I do. Very much so. He'll have misses, but yes, he throws the RPO game very well. I know there's this accuracy thing going around now. Like that's the thing. I don't think he has an accuracy problem. I think he has a consistency problem with his footwork. His footwork will get him in trouble at times where he'll miss some throws. But no, he throws a ton of RPO balls, and he's pretty good in those areas. So I'm not worried about that. I think where his accuracy needs to improve the most, in my opinion, is going to be on the intermediate to deep stuff. He throws a good deep ball as far as like velocity and depth and all that kind of stuff, but he'll miss. And I'll just give you a little preview of one of the things I'm going to talk about is he tends to miss inside on a lot of deep balls and post balls, which is to me a footwork thing, not an arm strength thing. It's a footwork thing that he's not getting the ball. He's not stepping correctly. And his release point is not where it needs to be to get the ball outside. That's more of a footwork issue than anything else that he'll need to improve upon. So I'm not concerned about any of that stuff. I mean, if you look at where he was to your point, I mean, I'm just going off completion percentage to back up what I see on film. But in 2022, he was 74.1% completions on balls between 7 and 9 yards. And he was at 86.8 completions on balls that were behind the line of scrimmage. So that's a lot of the screen game. And in those, he had 5 balls that were dropped. So, that's a pretty high level of drops for that particular position. So I am not at all concerned about that part of his game, to be honest with you. It's going to be more some of the downfield stuff. And so to give you some context and you compare that. So CJ Stroud 2 years ago was at 77% and 92% of those areas. So obviously CJ was higher behind the line of scrimmage. He had fewer drops, but where they were on the intermediate was very similar completion percentage, 74.1 to 77.7. with, obviously he had some of the issues. So I mean, I don't view that as an issue for me. He'll be fine. He throws that ball pretty well. 99 problems. BK1. Do you think there is merit to some of the O-line issues in 23 being due to the offensive scheme, not just fitting the players, i.e. pin and pull versus zone, and overall offensive strategy? To a degree, yes. I thought they did way too much pin and pull. And to your point, 99 problems, the offensive line was solid the first 5 games. It was solid. It wasn't great. It was solid. It had a couple good moments, but like they weren't great against Tennessee State. They weren't great against NC State. But they really started, like against Duke especially, and then Louisville, they started running a lot more pin and pull the second half of the year, which I think is part of the Joe Rudolph influence, and that hurt the run game a lot. Well, that was Joe Rudolph, though. And I just don't think they had the guard play to be a team that ran as much pin and pull as they did. Counter's one thing. Counter's more of quick hitting, but when they were like running the G scheme stuff and the outside stuff and getting on the perimeter as much as they were, that didn't seem to fit their players. So I do think that had some of the issues, but again, that's only part of it. They had issues with a lot of issues this year where they would hit and stop moving their feet on zone, duo, down blocks, drive blocks, all that stuff. That has nothing to do with pin pull. That has nothing to do with doing things that don't fit your system. That's a technical problem. They weren't great at taking, even veterans, they would hit and stop. Zeke Correll would hit and stop. Last year, early in the season, Zeke would hit and stop, but then Coach Easton worked him out of it, and then Zeke would hit and drive. And we would talk about how there was a couple snaps last year where Zeke would initially get knocked off the ball, but then he'd drive that guy back. Saw that 0 times this year. Why? Because he wasn't coached as well at those things this year, at driving your feet, moving your feet through contact as he was under Coach Easton. That's just a fact. That's an area where Coach Rudolph's going to have to get better. We saw that in the bowl game. Guys would hit and stop their feet. If these players, as talented as they are, hit and drive, they're going to be a lot better. And they're going to have to use their hands better as well. That was more about younger guys. But even the older guys, I've talked about this. The hands in the face by Blake Fisher, things like that. He regressed in year 2. I don't care what anybody says. He did. Why? Part of that's on Blake. Part of that's on Coach Rudolph. Because we also, if it was only Blake, then that's 100% on Blake, in my opinion. But he regressed. Zeke Correll regressed. Andrew Christopher regressed. Like all the veterans except for Joe Alt regressed, in my opinion. And so that's got to be looked at as a coaching issue. Now, the younger players did some good things late, but they didn't ask him to do a lot of that stuff. They were much more inside zone, to your point. But even then, there was still a lot of, dude, stop stopping your feet when you hit somebody. Keep driving. That was an across-the-board problem this year for everyone not named Joe Alt. And that's something that Coach Rudolph's going to have to figure out. Like, okay, what am I doing, or what are we not doing in practice that's getting us to the point where we're just not translating that onto the field? And you answer it, and you figure it out. Greekanese 2,206. Who will be our backup quarterback when the season starts? Does Angeli sit behind Leonard, or do we see another post-spring game transfer out? I hope that we don't see him transfer. I'd like to see Steve stay. I would, because you all know my opinion of Steve, but Steve still has some ability, and I want as many players with ability as possible. Would Notre Dame be fine if Steve Angeli transfers and it's Riley and Kenny and CJ? Yeah, it'll be fine. Would they be even better if they had Riley, CJ, Kenny, and Steve? Yes, of course. And so I don't want to see him leave. Will he be our backup quarterback when the spring starts? When the season starts, I have no idea. If I had to predict today, I would say yes, because that's where it's going to be right now. If we're going to go out there right now and start a team, and let's say they had winter practices, you'd have Riley Leonard with the 1s and Steve Angeli with the 2s. That's where it is right now. Can Kenny or CJ beat him out? They're capable of it. But they're going to have to play pretty well, because Steve showed in the bowl game that, hey, look, I can be counted on when I got to answer the bell. I can be counted on to go out there and play the game and do some good things. Okay, very true. Now he just has to be able to prove he can do it week after week and have those other guys not be even better than him. And so we'll find that out. But yeah, we'll see. We'll see. Let's go to the next question here. We have one from Archer's got the last couple. Archer says, what do you think about Harbaugh requesting immunity in his next contract from so he can't get fired pending the NCAA investigation? Well, number one, what I think about it is he knows they cheated and he knows what's coming down the pike. I don't like you get those people that go on trial and they're like, hey, you should take a plea deal. I'm not taking a plea deal. I didn't do anything. Why would I take a plea deal for a crime that I didn't commit? I'm fighting this, right? Like, what do you need immunity from? If you didn't do anything wrong, what do you need immunity from? So, to me, I think it just shows that he's knows he's in trouble. And if you're Michigan, that would be really foolish because let's say you find out things that you're not aware of right now. Let's say Michigan, the leadership doesn't know everything that happened, and it comes out down the road that this happened, right? Now you can't fire him, right? Because you get you don't do that. You don't do that. I would not do that. And I just think I think him requesting that is just further proof to me that he wants out. And this negotiation, which he knows is, well, I would assume he thinks is going to take some time, gives him some time to do the interview process with teams. And then if he's not going to get an NFL job and Michigan agrees to this, or he can kind of back out from that, then he can go back to Michigan and say, well, hey, I always was going to go back to Michigan, but I needed some protections. And so, part of the process was interview, you know how I'll spin it. That's exactly how I'll spin it. But, so yeah, that's exactly how I look, how I see the situation, in my opinion. I think you'll see a lot of that kind of stuff. All right, let's get to the looks like for now, the last question here is from Archer. He says, do you think Riley Leonard's drop in completion percentage from 2022 to 2023 was solely because of him being banged up 57.6% and 6.7 yards per attempt? Great. Well, let me just pull up Riley's numbers real quick so I can kind of throw these at you real fast. Give me a second. Let's pull up Duke's numbers for last year. So, to your point, Riley Leonard last year did only have 6.7 yards per attempt, but he was only at 7.6 the year before. And obviously his completion percentage, as you said, dropped from 63.8 to 57.6. So if you go look at the last two games, if you take out the last two games that he played and look at his numbers in that regard. So let me just type this in here real quick. So last year, Riley Leonard. So let me just get this number down real quick. Give me a second, Archer. I'll have this for you here in 1 second because I did the math wrong on this. It's 126 attempts. And he had 79 completions by 126 attempts. So before the injuries, he was at 63% or 62.7% before the injuries. That includes passing for 44.4% against Notre Dame, who had let me see here. They number one or number two in pass defense. Notre Dame had the number two. They were the number 2 team in the country this year in lowest completion percentage allowed. Here's another thing that factors into why his number was where it was. This year, Riley Leonard had to play against Notre Dame, Florida State, and Clemson. Now, against Florida State, he was banged up. We all watched that game. We know where he was in that game. But he did play against Clemson, and he went for 51.5%. He went for Notre Dame 44.4, and 43 point against Florida State. Here's the top 5 teams in the country last year in lowest completion percentage allowed defensively. Number 1, Florida State. Number 2, Notre Dame. Number 3, Ohio State. Number 4, Clemson. Number 5, Toledo. So when you look at who he played last year, they played 3 of the top 4 teams in the country that were great at keeping that production down. They were not teams that gave up a lot of – they just were teams that did not give up a lot of high completion percentages. And so I think Riley fell victim to that as well. But even with that context, before the injury, he was at 62.7. And he was with a receiving core that really didn't have a lot of good downfield weapons. They lost a couple of the good outside players that they had that had some size the year before that I think hurt them a little bit as well. When you look at their receiving core this year with Jordan Moore, Jalen Calhoun, Samir Hagans, none of those guys were big guys. Higgins is 5'10". The other two guys are like 6 foot. And they were his top guys on 22 as well. But in 22, he also had Eli Pankel, who was a taller kid. He was a 6'3" kid who they had the year before. They didn't have him last year. And so I think that hurt him a little bit as well. They didn't really have a great tight end. They didn't have a guy that could really, it was all underneath stuff. And then they throwed a lot to their backs. I mean, so you're throwing to a lot of 6 foot guys. I think that impacts it as well. And at Notre Dame, he's going to have one sub 6 foot guy to throw to. It's completely, even his running backs, even his starting running back is going to be 6'1" next year. So you just have bigger catch radii for, I guess, I don't know if that's the proper word for it or not. But those are things that you look at and say, hey, that's going to play a role in what you're doing. And so, and I also think this year they had some drop issues in some of those games, to be completely honest with you. And so that's something that you have to look at it as well. And when you're talking about evaluating him. So, but again, 62.7 before the injury. That's very close to what he was the year before. And that's in those 5 games, playing the number 2 and number 4 teams in the country and pass completions allowed. So that kind of gives some context to where you are. So, and then the other thing you said he struggled against Clemson and Notre Dame. He did not struggle against Clemson. If you're only looking at numbers, then yes, he struggled against Clemson. But if you watch that game, he did not struggle against Clemson. He went 17 of 33 for 175 yards, but go watch the game. He made some throws in that game. He didn't have a lot of guys open, and he also ran 98 yards on 8 attempts and a touchdown. I mean, they won that game by 21 points because in the second half, when they took that big lead, they have to throw a whole lot. So the only way you can say he struggled against Clemson is if you're just looking at the numbers. If you watch the game and you break down the film, like, that guy was a playmaker in that game. That's who he is. He's that guy that sometimes is going to go 17 for 33, but make a ton of plays. And that's what I say is, like, you can't just, like, this is not a shot at you, but you're an Ohio State fan. And so in Ohio State, if your offense is rolling, you're completing 75% of your throws. And all. That's not the offense he played in. He played in an offense where he had to go make plays. He had to go be a playmaker and do a lot of things, arm, leg, things like that. He wasn't throwing to Marvin Harrison and Emeka Egbuka and those kind of guys, right? He's throwing to, I mean, literally his number 2 receiver this year, and is actually, hold on a second. It actually might have been, let me just look this up real quick. I actually think, yes, his number 1 receiver this year in catches, and he was the number 2 receiver last year, is the kid he beat out for the starting quarterback job in 2022, Jordan Moore. So they battle for the starting job. He beats Jordan Moore out. They move him to receiver. That was his top pass catcher the last 2 years. Think about that. Now you send him to Notre Dame, where he's going to have Jordan Faison and Jaden Greathouse and Jaden Thomas and Bo Collins and Deion Colsey and Chris Mitchell and Mitchell Evans and Eli Raridan and Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price. You know what I mean? Like, you're going to see that change, in my opinion. But the way that he played the game at Duke, you're always going to have a lower completion percentage. You're going to have a lower yards per attempt because of the way they play. They throw a lot of balls behind the line of scrimmage. When we talked about this, you can go watch our breakdown of Duke going into that game. One of the things we said is they're not going to throw the ball downfield. They just don't have the players for it. They got a lot of short, shifty, after the catch guys. They're just not going to throw the ball downfield a lot. And then what's the first or second play of the game? He throws a back shoulder and the guy makes a play on it, and you're just like, okay, here you go. But they weren't able to do that. They weren't able to replicate that again moving forward. And so, no, I'm going to disagree that he did not play well against Clemson, per your comment. I think you need to go back and watch that game. Against Florida State, he struggled against Florida State and Louisville. Those are 2 very good pass defenses at the time, and he was really banged up. And by the way, Louisville had the number 10 pass defense in college football this year in lowest yards allowed per attempt. So you're talking about a kid that played 4 games against the 10 best teams in college football at lowest completion percentage. And that's going to impact your numbers. And then when you're doing it on one leg with multiple injuries, your numbers are going to reflect that. And you're doing it with Duke players. Because let me ask you this question. How many times in those 4 games against Clemson, Duke, Florida State, and Louisville, and how many of those games would you argue that Duke had the better roster in the matchup of their offensive talent against the defensive talent they're facing? The answer is 0. And usually it's a pretty significant drop off. And so, to me, those things are going to factor into it where you now fast forward him to Notre Dame. And my answer question to you is, how many games will Notre Dame play this year in the regular season where the other defense has more talent than the Notre Dame offense? I think you could argue that answer also is 0. So it's a different circumstance. Now, there are also things that Riley's got to do better, and I'll break those down on the board at some point in time. Won't dive into those yet. But there are things he needs to do better as well. But that's why I say, man, and it's kind of part of what we're talking about all day. Context matters, man. Context matters. And that's why you can't just throw out. And I'm not saying you're doing this, Arch, right? You're a smart football guy. I know that. But you've got to be able to look at the film and say, okay, did this guy do what he needed to do to go out there and win you football games? Because here's what I know. His numbers, passing numbers against Clemson were not great. But he had, let me see, total offense. He had 273 yards of offense that game and led them to a 21-point win. He made some plays. Man. He made some big-time plays. All right, we did have one more question pop up from David Jones. He says, Brian, you have commented several times that Pat Coogan is not a guard you want to pull, and neither is Rocco Spindler a ton. Yet they continued calling those plays. Weren't they saying the same thing you were? Apparently not. I mean, I don't know why they would call those plays if they're like, our guys can't pull. We're going to keep calling it. I mean, that would be terrible coaching. So apparently not. Maybe they did, but apparently not. So anyway, David, good question. I can't speak for what they did or didn't see. I have no idea what they did or didn't see. I know I saw it. I can only speak for myself. I can't speak for Jared Parker or Joe Rudolph or Deland McCullough or Marcus Freeman or Mike Mickens or anybody else. I can only speak for me. I'm going to speak for Brian Driscoll. That's it. So I know what I saw. I'm not always right, but I think in this one we can all pretty much agree that, yeah, you're okay. You're going there. And then Archer did say, are A&M and FSU the only teams you can make a case for being able to match up talent wise? Not with their defense. Now again, let's see who all Florida State adds. Florida State would be the only one I think it could be close, but the LSU's defense lost a ton from last season. I mean, a ton. And they were a good defense last year. They weren't a great defense last year. They were a good defense last year. But they're losing a ton off that team. I mean, they lost Walter Nolan. I believe Edgerrin Cooper is going pro. I could be wrong on that. Let me just look that up here real quick. Let's see here. Texas A&M. Is he transferring? Is he going pro? I could be wrong on that, but I thought, yeah, he's going to the draft. So he left. You look at Fidel Diggs. I don't know if he's coming back or not. Shamar Turner's not coming back. Walter Nolan's not coming back. They lost the safety that they had that's going to LSU. That's a really good player. What's that kid's name? I forget that kid's name, but they lost a really good safety that's going to LSU that I think is a good football player. He's a younger guy. So they lost a lot of players from a defense that was good, but was not great by any stretch last season. So I don't know that I would say that their talent matches up. It's not a blowout, but I don't think they have it. The only one that I think you can make a case for with some of their additions and some of the younger players is Florida State. Now, if we're talking about the 2023 Florida State, that's a different deal. The one that had Jared Verse, the one that had Fentrell Cypress, but they're losing a lot from their defense as well. So I'd have to see kind of where they add. But yeah. And I know the Florida State's added guys, but those guys aren't matching the guys they've lost. And I don't know that I would say that those guys are moving the needle in the way you think they are. But we'll see. But would I say you're nuts for saying Florida State's in that No, not at all, man. Not at all. I just say if you're going to say it, it's a yes or no question, right? It's either they have more talent or they don't have more talent. It's not a by what degree. It's just your roster's more talented than their roster, or it's not when you're talking about your offense against their defense. And I would say with A&M, no, it's not. With Florida State, it's arguable, but I think it's not. The rest of them, it's not really close, in my opinion, talent-wise. But talent doesn't equal. You know what's funny? The number 3 team, as far as matching up from a talent standpoint, who has the most talented defensive roster, the number 3 team on the schedule next year is probably USC, because they will have talent. And somebody in the chat earlier said, it looks like Lincoln Riley's taking defense seriously a little bit. And I'd say, yeah, he's made some really good hires this offseason. I don't know that that's going to fix things because you also need to change how you practice. But what I think's going on is he is actually preparing for the NFL. He's hiring a bunch of guys with NFL ties. Deanton Lynn, NFL, ties. They just hired was it a D line coach or was it a DP coach? The new hire, the guy that hired today or yesterday. He's a guy that was coaching with the Rams this past year. So, but as far as, and somebody says who's going to quarterback him, I'm Joseph. I don't know if you just jumped into the chat or not, but what we're referring to in this conversation is Notre Dame's offensive talent against the other team's defensive talent, not offense and like overall roster. I'm talking the particulars of this was the Notre Dame offense against the other team's defense. So that's the that was where the roster talent comparison came from. So that's kind of where that comes from. So just so we're clear on that one, because I think as far as looking at USC as a team, who their quarterback's going to be is a legit question mark. It's either going to be Miller Moss, who had a great bowl game, or it's going to be the kid that transferred in from UNLV. One of those two kids will obviously to be their guy, but they're not Caleb Williams. But I'm curious to see who else they do or don't add from the portal. So anyway, everybody, that's going to be it. Thanks, Joseph. I just want to make sure we're clear on that. Thanks, everybody, for being with me today. Another 3-hour plus solo show. I may have to not talk to anyone the rest of the day, try and save my voice, but I enjoyed it. You guys had a lot of great questions, so that mailbag definitely went really long, a lot longer than I thought, but worth it. Really good show. Before you leave, everybody, hit that like, hit the subscribe, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, and I'm telling y'all, you do not want to miss out on what we're doing on the message board at irishbreakdown.com or boards.irishbreakdown.com. Even some of you who aren't Notre Dame fans, if you like talking ball, come on over. I think you're going to enjoy it. But also, as I stated earlier, if you just want to support us financially, but you're not a message board person, you can still sign up and support us. But I've had a lot of people that said, hey, I wasn't a message board guy because I had been on here. It's just not my thing. But I love being on your board because there's a lot of people out talk ball. And there's certain things we don't allow that tries to keep a little bit tame. Sometimes it goes this way, but I always reel it back in. And I think you'll really enjoy the talk that we have. So make sure you sign up for that at boards.irishbreakdown.com. So for me, rest of the team, all of y'all, enjoyed it very much. Have a great rest of your day. I believe we have IB Nation Sports Talk tonight. I'll be back tomorrow. Hopefully I have my sidekick Ryan with me, my partner in crime Ryan with me. We'll see. Hopefully he's feeling better. But if not, I'll be back tomorrow and ready for another show. We'll break down the defense tomorrow in similar fashion to what we did today. It's going to be a lot of fun. So have a great rest of your day, everybody, and we'll see you again very soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.